On my wedding day, my sister handed me a beautifully wrapped vintage wooden box. Before my fingers could even brush the ribbon, my husband grabbed my wrist with a grip like iron. His military smartwatch was flashing a rapid, blinding red. He locked eyes with my sister, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "You brought a threat into my home." The smug smile slid right off her face as 6 of his Navy SEAL teammates stood up from their tables in perfect unison. "I am Maddie, 33 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I was the designated punching bag of my family. I worked my way up to become a senior data architect for a major financial firm, while my parents treated me like an inconvenience who was only useful when they needed someone to foot the bill. I thought my wedding day would be the one exception. I was wrong." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to relatives who tried to tear you down. The reception was held at a stunning waterfront estate in Maryland. Crystal chandeliers caught the evening light and champagne flowed freely. Beside me sat my new husband, David Thorne. At 36, David was a Navy SEAL commander, a man of intense discipline, sharp intellect, and fierce loyalty. He made me feel safe in a way my own blood relatives never did. My parents, Richard and Patricia, were seated at the head family table doing what they did best, making the evening entirely about themselves and my younger sister, Brittany. Brittany, at 30, was the undisputed golden child. She spent her life obsessing over social media, projecting a lifestyle of lavish wealth while constantly drowning in debt. She had recently married Jamal, a brilliant and highly respected African-American orthopedic surgeon. Jamal was a good man, genuinely kind and incredibly hardworking, but he was entirely blind to the toxic reality of the family he had married into. My parents fawned over Brittany and Jamal, introducing them to my husband's military colleagues, as if Brittany were the bride. Whenever someone congratulated my parents on my marriage, my mother would quickly pivot the conversation, reminding everyone that Brittany had a gorgeous destination wedding last year, or bragging about the latest medical conference Jamal attended. I squeezed David's hand under the table, doing my best to ignore the familiar sting of their blatant dismissal. The clinking of a silver fork against a crystal glass brought the buzzing room to a hush. Brittany strutted up to the microphone in the center of the dance floor, smoothing down her heavily beaded designer dress, a dress I knew for a fact she could not actually afford on her maxed-out credit cards. She smiled her signature camera-ready smile. "Hello, everyone." Brittany began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I am Brittany, Maddie's younger, but let us be honest, much more outgoing sister." A few awkward chuckles rippled through the room. I shifted in my seat. I knew exactly what was coming. When Maddie told us she was marrying David, we were all so shocked. Brittany continued, leaning into the microphone and pacing slightly. "I mean, my sister has always been our little data nerd sitting in dark rooms staring at numbers all day. She struggled for so long to fit in with normal people. We honestly worried she would end up alone with a dozen computer servers instead of friends. So imagine our absolute surprise when she brings home a military guy. A guy whose whole job is just following orders and shooting things." The silence in the room became immediately suffocating. David's colleagues, several high-ranking military officials, and seasoned combat veterans stared at her with stone-cold expressions. Beside me, David's jaw tightened, but he remained perfectly still, a trained professional assessing a hostile situation. My father, Richard, actually chuckled aloud from his seat, while my mother, Patricia, beamed at Brittany as if she had just delivered a comedic masterpiece. Jamal, however, looked absolutely mortified. He shifted his weight heavily in his chair, his eyes darting apologetically toward David and me. He reached up and rubbed the back of his neck, clearly wishing he could disappear. "But we are so happy for you, Maddie." Brittany pushed on, completely oblivious to the heavy, uncomfortable tension she had just created in the room. "And to welcome David to the family properly, Mom, Dad, and I wanted to give you something truly special tonight." She gestured to one of the catering staff who brought forward a heavy, dark mahogany box. It looked antique, polished to a high shine with intricate brass clasps securing the lid. Brittany picked it up, her heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floor as she walked directly over to our sweetheart table. "This is a family heirloom," Brittany said, holding the heavy box out to me with a wide, triumphant smirk. "It has been passed down for generations, and we decided we wanted you to have it today. It is a symbol of us opening our home to your new husband." I reached out, a forced polite smile plastered on my face, wanting nothing more than to take the wooden box, say thank you, and end this agonizing public spectacle. But before my fingers could make contact with the polished mahogany, David moved. It was a sudden blur of motion. His hand shot out, wrapping around my wrist with a firm, unyielding grip, stopping my hand dead in its tracks. "Do not touch it," David commanded. His voice was not loud, but it possessed an authority that cut through the quiet room like a serrated blade. I looked at him in total confusion. "What is wrong?" I asked, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. David did not answer me right away. His eyes were locked firmly on his left wrist. He was wearing a highly classified military-grade tactical smartwatch, a piece of equipment he never took off, not even for our wedding photos. The screen, which was usually a subdued digital display, was currently flashing a rapid, blinding, aggressive red light. It was a frequency anomaly alert. David stood up slowly, pushing his chair back. The easygoing, smiling groom from 5 minutes ago was completely gone, replaced instantly by the hardened SEAL commander. He stepped around the table, placing himself directly between me and Brittany, his broad shoulders shielding me from her completely. Brittany took a step back, her arrogant smirk faltering for the first time. "What is your problem?" she scoffed, though her voice shook noticeably. "It is just a wedding gift. Take the box, Maddie." David stared down at her, his expression devoid of any warmth, any politeness, or any hesitation. "You brought a threat into my home," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that sent shivers down my spine. Before my parents could even shout a protest from their table, the entire atmosphere in the reception hall shifted violently. 6 men sitting at the tables nearest to us, David's groomsmen, all active-duty Navy SEALs, stood up in absolute, terrifying unison. Heavy chairs scraped loudly against the floor. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, their eyes locked intently on the wooden box trembling in Brittany's hands. The soft, romantic lighting of the reception hall suddenly felt like the harsh, unforgiving glare of a military interrogation room, and the look of arrogant superiority on my sister's face instantly dissolved into raw, unadulterated fear. "Clear the immediate radius!" David barked, his voice carrying a tactical precision that left absolutely no room for debate. The 6 men did not hesitate. They moved with a fluid, practiced efficiency that was terrifying to witness in the middle of a wedding reception. 2 of them smoothly stepped in front of the head table, forming a solid physical barrier that stopped my parents from rushing forward. Another stepped behind Brittany, cutting off any potential route of escape. A groomsman named Carter, a man with cold gray eyes and an imposing build, gently but firmly pried the heavy mahogany box from Brittany's trembling fingers before she could even process what was happening. The murmurs of the wedding guests swelled into a wave of panicked confusion. People were standing up, craning their necks to see what had caused the groom and his entire wedding party to snap into combat readiness. "David, what is going on?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady, despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "My watch," David replied, not taking his eyes off Brittany. "It is equipped with a localized radio frequency detector. It is designed to alert me to unauthorized signal transmissions and data scraping attempts within a 10-foot radius." The moment she brought that box close to our table, the proximity sensors redlined. "That thing is actively broadcasting." "You are crazy!" Brittany stammered, her voice pitching up an octave. She took a step backward, nearly tripping over the hem of her heavily beaded dress. "It is a wooden box. It is a family antique. You military guys are totally paranoid. Mom, tell them to stop acting like lunatics." Patricia tried to push past the groomsmen, blocking her path, her face flushed with indignant rage. "Unhand my daughter's gift right now," my mother shouted, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You are ruining the reception. Maddie, tell your husband to call off his attack dogs." I did not say a word. I simply stood beside David, watching the scene unfold with a strange sense of detachment. For 33 years, I had been conditioned to apologize, to smooth things over, to take the blame whenever my family caused a scene. But tonight was different. Tonight, I had backup. "Open it," David commanded Carter, ignoring my mother completely. Carter carried the box to a nearby empty cocktail table. He set it down carefully, examining the brass clasps and the thick velvet lining visible inside. He pulled a matte black tactical multi-tool from his formal suit jacket and flicked open a small flat steel blade. He ran his fingers along the inner edge of the box, pressing against the velvet. "False bottom," Carter reported, his tone entirely devoid of emotion. "The interior depth does not match the exterior dimensions." He wedged the steel blade into the microscopic seam, where the velvet met the mahogany edge and twisted sharply. A loud crack rang out across the silent room as the wooden panel splintered and popped loose. Everyone in the immediate vicinity gasped. Even Jamal, who had been standing a few paces behind his wife, froze completely. Nestled inside a custom-carved hollow beneath the velvet was a highly sophisticated piece of black market technology. It featured a high-capacity lithium battery pack, a cellular transmitter, and a microscopic microphone wired directly alongside a GPS module. A tiny green light blinked steadily in the center, broadcasting its active status to anyone holding the receiver. "Active localized signal interceptor," Carter announced, looking up at David. "It is recording audio and piggybacking off local Wi-Fi networks to transmit data. This is not off-the-shelf consumer electronics. This is military-grade or damn close to it. Highly illegal for civilian possession." As a senior data architect, I stared at the blinking green light, my mind instantly analyzing the threat. This was not a simple tracking bug. A device like this was capable of cloning keystrokes, intercepting two-factor authentication codes, and bypassing secure networks. If this box had been placed in our home near my work laptops, it could have provided full access to the classified financial portfolios I managed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My sister, the woman who spent my entire life belittling my intelligence, had just handed me a targeted corporate espionage tool wrapped in a wedding bow. "What is the meaning of this?" Jamal demanded, stepping forward. His deep, commanding voice cut through the rising panic of the crowd. He looked at his wife, his expression shifting rapidly from embarrassment to deep, unsettling suspicion. As an orthopedic surgeon, Jamal was a man of science and facts. He recognized undeniable evidence when he saw it. "Brittany, what exactly did you bring into this room?" Brittany's face was completely drained of color. The heavy makeup she wore now looked like a mask pasted over a ghost. She looked like a trapped animal, her eyes darting frantically between the exposed wiretapping device, her furious husband, and the wall of Navy SEALs standing at attention. "I do not know," she stammered, her voice shrill and trembling. "I bought it at an antique shop. The guy told me it was a vintage music box. I swear I had no idea that thing was inside." David took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The sheer physical presence of my husband forced Brittany to shrink back against a table. "Do not insult my intelligence," David said, his tone dangerously calm. "A device like this requires manual activation. It requires a paired receiver. It requires someone to deliberately pack it, charge it, and hand it over. You did not buy this at an antique shop. You brought a targeted espionage tool to a gathering of active-duty military personnel and federal contractors." The absolute gravity of the situation settled over the reception hall. This was no longer a petty family drama or a bad joke. This was a severe security breach. Planting a bug on a Navy SEAL commander is a federal crime. Brittany shook her head frantically, tears welling in her eyes. It was her classic predictable defense mechanism: cry to gain sympathy and deflect all accountability. But the SEALs remained entirely unmoved by her theatrical performance. "I swear," she cried out, reaching desperately toward our parents' table. "Mom, Dad, tell them I would never do something like this. It is a mistake." Maddie planted it. "Maddie is just trying to humiliate me because she has always been jealous of me and Jamal." It was a desperate, pathetic pivot. She was literally standing in front of the disassembled box, the blinking green light exposing her undeniable guilt. And she was still trying to play the victim. David did not entertain her performance for a single second. He turned to Carter, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Contain the device, isolate the signal, and nobody leaves this reception hall until I say so." The wedding guests broke into panicked whispers. The glamorous, expensive reception had officially morphed into a lockdown. My heart pounded against my ribs, but for the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to shrink away or apologize for my family's toxic behavior. I stood tall beside my husband, watching the house of cards my family had built finally begin to collapse. The shock of David's command lasted exactly 3 seconds before my mother shattered it. Patricia lunged forward, her face twisted in an ugly mask of indignation. She shoved past her own chair, her voice cutting through the ambient panic of the guests. "Are you out of your mind?" my mother shrieked, pointing a manicured finger directly at David's chest. "Locking down a wedding. You are acting like a paranoid militant. It is just a joke tracker." She marched toward the cocktail table where Carter had isolated the device, but another groomsman immediately stepped into her path, crossing his arms. Patricia gasped in offense, looking back at my father for support. Richard puffed out his chest and marched up beside his wife, trying to present a united front of parental authority. "Your mother is right," Richard barked, attempting to use his booming executive voice on my husband. "You military guys take yourselves way too seriously. We knew you two were being secretive about your honeymoon destination. Brittany thought it would be hilarious to slip a little GPS bug in your gift so we could see what tropical island you were hiding on. It is a prank, a harmless family prank." I stared at the two people who had raised me. For decades, they had spun narratives to protect Brittany, twisting reality until I was always the villain and she was always the victim. But listening to them defend a military-grade data sniffer as a harmless joke was a new level of delusion. I looked over at Jamal. He was shaking his head slowly, his eyes locked on his wife. As a surgeon, he understood complex technology and precision. He knew a sophisticated espionage tool was not something you ordered off a novelty website for a prank. "A joke?" I asked, my voice cutting through my mother's hysterics. "Mom, that is an active, localized signal interceptor. It does not just track location. It clones keystrokes and steals network data. I manage classified financial portfolios for a living. If I brought that into my home office, it would compromise millions of dollars in client assets. Does that sound like a honeymoon prank to you?" Patricia waved her hand dismissively, refusing to even look at the device. "Oh, stop using your tech jargon to sound important, Maddie. You are always doing this. Always trying to make Brittany look bad because you cannot stand sharing the spotlight." She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin through the lace of my wedding dress. "Look at your sister. She is terrified. You need to apologize to her right now and call off this ridiculous stunt before you ruin your own reception." Richard nodded firmly. "Your mother is exactly right. You are embarrassing the family in front of our guests, Maddie. Tell your husband to tell his friends to stand down. We will take the box back and forget this ever happened." The absolute audacity of their demands left me breathless. They were standing in a room full of federal contractors and active-duty military personnel, demanding we ignore a major security threat to protect Brittany's feelings. They genuinely believed their parental authority superseded federal law. David stepped between me and my mother. He moved smoothly but with undeniable force, breaking her grip on my arm. His sheer physical presence forced Patricia to take an awkward step backward. He did not yell. He did not argue with them. He simply treated my parents like irrelevant background noise. David looked at Carter, who had just placed the dismantled espionage device inside a specialized signal-blocking Faraday pouch. Carter gave a single sharp nod, confirming the threat was temporarily contained, but the evidence was preserved. David reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out his secure smartphone. He dialed a number, his eyes never leaving Brittany, who was now trembling uncontrollably against the catering table. My mother started to shout another demand, but David raised one hand, silencing her, with a look so cold it froze the words in her throat. "This is Commander David Thorne," he said, his voice crisp and carrying across the dead silent room. "I have a priority 1 security breach at my current location. I need an NCIS response team dispatched immediately. We have an unauthorized active espionage device planted on my person by a civilian targeting both military and classified financial assets. My father's jaw dropped. My mother's furious ranting died completely. The color drained from Brittany's face as she let out a quiet, terrified sob. They had spent their entire lives screaming their way out of consequences, bullying me into submission behind closed doors and expecting the world to bow to their narrative. But as David provided the dispatcher with the exact address of our wedding venue, the horrifying reality finally dawned on them. This was no longer a petty family dispute they could manipulate. They had just triggered a federal investigation. My father stared at David for a long, heavy second before his face mottled into a furious shade of purple. He realized the manipulation tactics that had worked on every school principal, neighbor, and employer for the past 3 decades were completely useless against a Navy SEAL. So he resorted to his ultimate defense mechanism. He decided to play the victim. "You think you can intimidate us with some phone call?" Richard yelled, pulling his own smartphone from his tailored suit jacket. "We are upstanding citizens. I am calling the real police right now." He dialed 911, holding the phone to his ear while pointing a shaking, accusatory finger at my husband. "Yes, operator. I need officers at the waterfront estate immediately," he shouted, projecting his voice so every terrified wedding guest could hear his performance. "We are being held hostage. A group of crazy militant men are attacking my daughter and holding us against our will. Please hurry. They are unhinged." Patricia instantly joined the charade. She let out a loud theatrical wail and rushed over to wrap her arms protectively around Brittany, who was still cowering against the catering table. My mother glared at me with pure venom. "How could you let your husband do this to your own sister?" she cried out. "You are a monster, Maddie, a jealous, bitter monster." I simply stood there, my posture straight and my chin held high. I felt a profound sense of clarity wash over me. For years they had gaslighted me into believing I was the crazy one. They had spun their webs of deceit so tightly that I often questioned my own sanity. But watching them try to spin a targeted federal espionage attempt into a story about a bullied sister was pathetic. It was a masterclass in toxic narcissism, and it was failing spectacularly. The minutes that followed felt like suspended animation. The reception hall was a pressure cooker of anxiety. The wedding guests spoke in hushed, frightened whispers. David and his groomsmen did not move a single inch. They held the perimeter with terrifying discipline, their faces blank, their eyes constantly scanning the room for any sudden movements. Carter remained planted firmly beside the cocktail table, guarding the signal-blocking pouch that held Brittany's device. I glanced over at Jamal. My brother-in-law, the brilliant orthopedic surgeon, stood a few paces away from his wife. His broad shoulders were tense, and his dark eyes were calculating. He looked at Brittany, really looked at her, as if seeing a stranger hiding inside the woman he had married. "Tell me the truth right now," Jamal demanded softly, his deep voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Where did you get that device, Brittany?" Brittany choked on a fake sob, reaching a trembling hand out toward him. "Baby, please, you have to believe me," she pleaded, tears spilling over her heavy mascara. "I bought it at an antique store. Maddie set me up. She is trying to ruin our lives because she is jealous of your success." Jamal did not take her hand. He took a slow, deliberate step backward. His silence was deafening. He knew she was lying. The wail of police sirens pierced the tense atmosphere of the reception hall. Red and blue lights flashed wildly through the high-arched windows, casting eerie shadows across the elegant floral arrangements. The heavy double doors of the venue burst open, and 2 local police officers rushed inside, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. They scanned the room clearly, expecting a drunken brawl or a violent hostage situation based on my father's hysterical 911 call. Richard and Patricia immediately ran toward the officers, waving their arms like shipwreck survivors spotting a rescue boat. "Officers, thank God you are here!" My father gasped physically, pointing at David and Carter. "Those men are holding my daughter hostage. They assaulted her, stole her personal property, and are refusing to let anyone leave. You need to arrest them immediately." The lead officer, A young man who looked entirely out of his depth in a room full of people wearing tactical expressions and expensive tuxedos puffed out his chest and marched directly toward David. "Sir, I need you and your men to step back right now," the officer commanded, resting his hand on his radio. "Release the young woman and hand over whatever item you took from her. We are taking control of this situation." David did not even blink. He stood his ground, radiating an aura of absolute authority that made the local cop hesitate. "I am Commander David Thorne, United States Navy," David stated calmly. "We have secured a piece of black market espionage technology that was actively transmitting localized data. This is a federal security breach involving classified assets. We are maintaining this perimeter until federal agents arrive." The local officer frowned, clearly agitated that his authority was being questioned in his own jurisdiction. "I do not care who you are or what branch of the military you serve in, buddy." The cop shot back, his voice rising in volume. "You are in my town. You do not have the jurisdiction to detain civilians or confiscate property. Hand over the item and order your men to stand down, or I am placing you all in handcuffs for unlawful detainment." The SEALs did not flinch. They did not look at the police officers. They kept their eyes fixed on David, waiting for a single nod or command. The tension in the room spiked to a suffocating level. My mother smirked at me, clearly believing that the local police were about to put my husband in his place. Before the officer could unclip his handcuffs, the heavy, aggressive sound of tires screeching on gravel echoed from the driveway outside. The noise was followed by the slamming of heavy car doors. Through the glass entrance, 4 matte black SUVs blocked the venue's circular driveway, completely boxing in the local police cruisers. The venue doors swung open with tremendous force. A highly coordinated team of federal agents wearing tactical gear and navy blue windbreakers, emblazoned with the letters NCIS in bold yellow font, stormed into the reception hall. The lead agent, a tall man with a severe expression, marched straight up to the local police officer and flashed a federal badge directly in his face. "Naval Criminal Investigative Service," the lead agent announced, his voice booming with undeniable finality. "We have the con. Step aside, officer. This is now a federal crime scene." The local cops immediately backed down, raising their hands in surrender and stepping away from David. They recognized instantly that they were entirely outranked and outclassed. The lead agent turned to David, exchanging a crisp, professional nod. "Commander Thorne," the agent said, "where is the device and where is the suspect?" David gestured to the cocktail table where Carter stood guard. "The device is secured in the pouch. The suspect is the woman in the beaded dress." Brittany stared at the federal agents swarming the room. The absolute reality of her situation finally crashed down on her. My parents' manipulation tactics, their fake tears, and their wealthy suburban entitlement held zero power over federal investigators. The horrifying prospect of a federal prison sentence flashed in her wide, panicked eyes. Logic completely abandoned her. In a desperate, foolish, and entirely reckless move, Brittany let out a guttural scream. She lunged forward, shoving past my mother and diving directly toward the cocktail table. She reached her hands out, wildly desperate to grab the signal-blocking pouch and smash the device to pieces before the agents could confiscate the evidence. She did not even make it halfway. An NCIS agent moved with lightning speed. He intercepted her path, grabbed her outstretched wrist, and twisted it smoothly behind her back in a textbook submission hold. He pressed her face down against the crisp white tablecloth, sending crystal champagne flutes crashing to the floor. "Brittany, you are officially detained under suspicion of federal espionage and unauthorized surveillance of a military official," the agent stated coldly, securing her arm firmly. "Do not move." Patricia let out a blood-curdling scream that threatened to shatter the crystal centerpieces. She lunged toward the federal agent, pinning her daughter, her manicured hands curled into claws. A second NCIS agent stepped effortlessly into her path, raising a palm clad in a black tactical glove. "Step back, ma'am," the agent warned, his voice devoid of any inflection. "Interfering with a federal detention will result in your immediate arrest for obstruction." Richard grabbed his wife by the waist, physically dragging her backward. For all his bluster and corporate arrogance, my father knew when he was outmatched. He recognized the heavy, uncompromising reality of federal law enforcement. He held Patricia tightly, his face pale and slick with sudden sweat, watching his golden child pressed against a catering table surrounded by broken glass. That was when Jamal stepped forward. My brother-in-law moved with the calculated, precise grace of a man who spent his life operating on human spines. As a highly respected orthopedic surgeon, Jamal was accustomed to high-stakes environments. He did not yell or wave his arms like my parents. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored tuxedo, his dark eyes fixed entirely on the woman pinned to the table. He approached the lead NCIS agent with his hands clearly visible, projecting calm authority. Agent Jamal said, his deep voice cutting through the frantic murmurs of the wedding guests. "I am Dr. Jamal Vance, her husband. I understand you have a protocol to follow, but she is unarmed and clearly subdued. May I have 2 minutes to speak with my wife? I need to understand what is happening before you remove her from this premises." The lead agent glanced at David. David gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. The agent holding Brittany eased his grip slightly, allowing her to stand upright, though he kept a firm hold on her upper arm. She looked completely disheveled. Her intricate updo was ruined, and champagne soaked the front of her expensive beaded gown. Jamal stepped into her line of sight. He did not reach out to comfort her. He did not offer a reassuring embrace. He stood perfectly still, examining her with the same detached clinical scrutiny he would use to evaluate a complicated fracture on an X-ray. "Brittany," Jamal said, his tone low and dangerously even. "Look at me." Brittany sniffled loudly, her chest heaving as she forced fresh tears to spill over her cheeks. She leaned toward him, expecting the unconditional support she had always received from my parents. "Jamal, baby, you have to do something," she cried, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. "You have to call my lawyer. Maddie is framing me. She set this whole thing up to ruin my life." Jamal did not flinch. He did not reach for his phone. He just stared down at her. "Let us be very clear about the reality of this situation," Jamal stated, his voice completely devoid of warmth. "You just handed a Navy SEAL commander a box containing military-grade surveillance technology. You did it in front of a room full of federal contractors, active-duty military personnel, and my own colleagues. Do not insult my intelligence by blaming your sister. I am asking you one time, and you are going to give me a straight answer. Where did you get that device?" Brittany swallowed hard, her eyes darting frantically around the room. She was looking for an escape route, a sympathetic face, anyone who would buy her usual routine. But my parents were silenced by the federal agents, and Jamal was refusing to play his assigned role. "I told you," Brittany stammered, her breathing shallow and erratic. "I bought the box at a flea market downtown last week. I thought it was just a beautiful antique. The guy who sold it to me must have left that weird electronic junk inside. I had no idea it was a tracking thing." Jamal crossed his arms over his chest. "A flea market," he repeated flatly. "Yes," she insisted, nodding her head so vigorously a hairpin fell out and clattered onto the floor. "A little vendor stall near the waterfront. I paid cash for it." A muscle in Jamal's jaw ticked. As a surgeon, his entire career was built on identifying inconsistencies. He was a master of diagnosing a problem by observing the symptoms, and right now his wife was presenting a textbook case of pathological lying. "Brittany," Jamal said softly, stepping a fraction of an inch closer. "Last week you told me you were in New York attending a marketing seminar. Your credit card statements showed you staying at a luxury hotel in Manhattan. You were not at a flea market near the waterfront." Brittany froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The panic in her eyes spiked. She realized she had just tripped over her own web of lies, a web she had spun so recklessly she could no longer keep her timeline straight. "Okay, no wait!" Brittany scrambled, her voice pitching higher as she desperately tried to patch the hole in her story. "It was not last week. It was yesterday. Yes, yesterday afternoon. I went to a specialty gift shop in the suburbs. I bought it brand new. They must have put a security tag inside it, and David is just overreacting." Jamal let out a slow, heavy breath. He looked down at her hands. Despite her frantic attempts to appear as the innocent victim, her physical tells betrayed her completely. Her fingers were trembling violently, vibrating with the massive adrenaline dump of a cornered predator. Her pupils were dilated, and a thin sheen of nervous sweat coated her forehead. "A security tag," Jamal repeated, shaking his head. "A security tag that requires a lithium battery pack and a cellular transmitter. A security tag that a Navy SEAL identifies as an active espionage tool." Brittany tried to reach out and grab his jacket, but the federal agent pulled her back sharply. "Please, Jamal," she begged, her voice cracking. "Why are you doing this to me?" Maddie handed me the box in the hallway before the reception started. She told me to present it to her as a peace offering. This is her fault. She planned this whole humiliation. Jamal stared at her in absolute silence. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and the revelation was utterly devastating. He mentally tallied the 3 glaring holes she had just presented in less than 60 seconds. First, she claimed she bought it at a flea market last week, while she was supposedly in New York. Second, she changed her story to buying it at a gift shop yesterday, calling it a simple security tag. Third, she completely abandoned the purchase narrative and accused me of handing it to her in the hallway, an impossible feat, considering I had been taking professional photographs with David on the estate lawns for the entire hour leading up to the reception. Jamal looked over his shoulder. He made eye contact with me, standing tall and unwavering beside my husband, surrounded by an impenetrable wall of highly trained military personnel. He looked at my parents, who were cowering behind a federal agent, entirely willing to let their golden child drag everyone down with her. Finally, Jamal looked back down at the woman he had married. The illusion of the perfect, charming, high society wife evaporated instantly. He noticed the violent shaking of her hands, the sweat on her brow, and the desperate, manipulative gleam in her eyes. He realized he did not know the woman standing in front of him at all. He had married a stranger, a pathological liar who had just committed a federal crime and was willing to destroy anyone to save herself. Agent Jamal said, turning his back on Brittany completely. "You can take her away. I have nothing left to say to this woman." Brittany's shrieks echoed through the grand reception hall as the 2 federal agents marched her toward the exit. She thrashed against their grip, her expensive beaded gown tearing at the seam. But the agents remained entirely unmoved by her hysterics. My mother collapsed into a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands and sobbing loudly, while my father stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing, without a single word coming out. Jamal did not look back. He adjusted his suit jacket and walked out a side door, leaving his deceitful wife to the federal authorities. David wrapped a heavy, protective arm around my shoulders, shielding me from the stares of our remaining guests. Our bags were packed and waiting in a luxury town car outside, tagged for a 2-week honeymoon in Maui. We were supposed to be drinking champagne at 30,000 feet by midnight, celebrating the start of our new life together. Instead, David directed our driver to cancel the airport route and follow the convoy of black SUVs straight to the Regional Naval Criminal Investigative Field Office. The ride was agonizingly silent. I stared out the tinted window of the town car, watching the city lights blur past. The adrenaline that had kept me standing during the reception was slowly wearing off, replaced by a cold, heavy dread. My own sister had tried to plant a surveillance device in my home. The betrayal was so absolute it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. The contrast upon arriving at the federal facility was jarring. I was still wearing my custom-tailored ivory wedding gown, the intricate lace trailing across the cold, scuffed linoleum floor of a high-security briefing room. David sat close beside me, his crisp tuxedo looking entirely out of place under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights. We sat in silence for nearly 2 hours while the tech analyst tore the mahogany box apart in a secure lab down the hall. The heavy metal door clicked open and the lead agent stepped inside, followed by a younger man holding a rugged military-grade tablet. The lead agent introduced himself as Special Agent Reynolds and the younger man as Hayes, a senior cyber intelligence analyst. They did not offer pleasantries or apologies for ruining our wedding night. They operated with the same blunt clinical efficiency that David possessed, treating the situation with the utmost severity. Hayes placed his tablet on the stainless steel table between us. He tapped the screen, bringing up high-resolution photographs of the dismantled device that had been hidden beneath the velvet lining of Brittany's gift. Commander Thorne Mam Hayes began, his eyes flicking between David and me. We completed a preliminary teardown of the hardware. Your instincts were correct, Commander, but the scope of the threat is vastly different than we initially assumed. David leaned forward, his posture rigid and commanding. Explain. Hayes swiped to a complex schematic of the circuit board. This is not a standard listening device. The microphone is secondary, almost an afterthought. The core of this unit is a highly modified enterprise-grade network infiltrator. It is essentially a sophisticated Wi-Fi data sniffer combined with a keystroke logger and an automated packet interceptor. I frowned, the technical jargon immediately triggering my professional instincts. I deal with enterprise security protocols every single day at my firm. A packet interceptor, I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the bare room. You are saying this device was designed to intercept local network traffic? Exactly. Hayes nodded, looking genuinely impressed that I understood the terminology. If this box had been placed inside your home, it would have created a shadow network mimicking your home router. It forces all your local devices, laptops, phones, smart TVs, to route their internet traffic through it before hitting the actual web. It is explicitly designed to capture secure login credentials in real time. But modern financial security uses multi-factor authentication. I pointed out, my mind racing through the potential vulnerabilities. A simple password intercept would not be enough to breach a secure institutional system. That is the terrifying part. Agent Reynolds interjected, crossing his arms and leaning against the concrete wall. The cellular transmitter attached to the battery pack is programmed to execute a synchronized bypass. It captures the initial login, intercepts the two-factor authentication token sent to the user's phone on the same compromised network, and transmits both to a remote offshore server in a fraction of a second. Whoever built this wanted live, unrestricted access to a highly secure network. David scowled, staring at the glowing schematic on the tablet. My operational hardware is secured behind multi-layered military firewalls. I do not bring classified Department of Defense intelligence onto a civilian home network. A device like this would be entirely useless against a Navy SEAL encrypted drive. It would just bounce off the outer security shell and trigger a localized lockdown. The room went dead silent. David and the two federal agents looked at the tablet, trying to figure out the logic. It made no sense for a civilian to target a military commander with a digital weapon that could not even penetrate his basic armor. But I knew. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, and the heavy fabric of my wedding dress suddenly felt suffocating. My breathing hitched as the pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind, forming a picture so sinister I could barely comprehend it. It was not meant for you, David, I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of dawning horror and absolute rage. David turned to me, his brow furrowed with deep concern. What do you mean? I looked up at Agent Reynolds and Hayes, meeting their intense stares. I am a senior data architect. I design and manage back-end database structures for one of the largest financial institutions on the East Coast. I frequently work from my home office. When I log in, I access institutional banking nodes that control highly classified financial portfolios. I pointed a shaking finger at the image of the device on the tablet. Brittany is not a spy. She does not care about military secrets or naval deployments. That device was meant to sit on a shelf in my living room, capture my corporate credentials, and give someone remote, unrestricted access to hundreds of millions of dollars in client assets. The federal agent stared at me, the massive gravity of my statement settling heavily over the cold interrogation room. My sister had not just ruined my wedding out of petty jealousy. She had attempted to orchestrate a massive, unprecedented financial heist using my home, my career, and my secure access as the back door. The silence in the interrogation room shattered as Agent Hayes aggressively tapped the screen of his tablet. His fingers flew across the digital keyboard, launching a barrage of federal diagnostic protocols. The entire trajectory of the investigation had just shifted on a dime. This was no longer a localized military threat. It was a targeted cyber heist with national economic implications. David stood up, the rigid set of his jaw indicating a lethal level of focus. He placed both hands on the stainless steel table, leaning over the analyst. Track the offshore routing IP programmed into that transmitter, David ordered, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. If Brittany was trying to breach a Tier 1 financial institution through my wife, she did not build the back-end architecture herself. Someone supplied her with that hardware. Follow the digital breadcrumbs. Hayes nodded, his eyes locked on the scrolling lines of code illuminating his tablet. Already on it, Commander. I am pulling the suspect's complete digital footprint. Financials, cloud backups, encrypted messaging histories. We have a federal warrant for immediate data seizure based on the national security threat. I sat frozen in my wedding dress, the sheer magnitude of the betrayal sinking deep into my bones. Brittany had always been vain, materialistic, and deeply insecure, but orchestrating a multi-million-dollar cybercrime required a level of calculated malice I had never imagined she possessed. She was willing to let me face federal prison for a corporate data breach just to fuel her own selfish lifestyle. Agent Reynolds stepped away from the wall, pulling out a secure radio to coordinate with the field teams currently tearing apart the wedding venue. "What is the motive?" Maddie Reynolds asked, turning his sharp gaze on me. "Corporate espionage usually involves rival firms or state actors. Why would a civilian with no tech background target a family member's financial access?" I shook my head, my mind racing through decades of my sister's toxic behavior. "She is obsessed with wealth," I explained. "She posts constantly about her luxury vacations, designer clothes, and elite status. But she does not work. Jamal funds her entire life. Maybe he finally cut her off." "Got a hit!" Hayes interrupted, his voice spiking with adrenaline. The sudden noise made me flinch. Hayes swiped a series of documents onto the main screen facing us. "I just cracked the suspect's offshore banking history. Commander, ma'am, you need to see this." David and I moved closer to the tablet. The screen was flooded with bank statements, wire transfers, and cryptocurrency ledger receipts. None of them were under Brittany's legal name, but they were all tied to the IP address of her personal mobile device and a hidden encrypted email account. The numbers were staggering. Red lines of debt stretched across the screen, painting a picture of absolute financial devastation. "She is completely underwater," Hayes stated flatly, pointing to a massive deficit column. "It looks like she fell into a high-yield cryptocurrency scam about 8 months ago. She leveraged her and Jamal's joint assets, took out massive margins, and the liquidity pool collapsed. She lost everything she invested." I stared at the screen in disbelief. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. $400,000, Hayes confirmed. "And that is just the baseline deficit." David let out a sharp, incredulous breath. 400 grand. How does an orthopedic surgeon's wife hide a loss of nearly $500,000 without her husband noticing? "She did not just lose it," Agent Reynolds observed, leaning over my shoulder to read the glowing text. "She tried to win it back. Look at these outbound routing nodes." Hayes tapped the screen, highlighting a web of transactions bouncing through dark web gateways. "Reynolds is right. Once the crypto crashed, she panicked. She started funneling money into unregulated, illicit offshore gambling syndicates. High-stakes online poker, digital sports betting, anything with a massive payout potential. She was chasing the deficit, trying to replace the missing funds before her husband noticed the bleeding accounts. But she did not win it back." I deduced, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "She dug the hole deeper. Much deeper." Hayes agreed grimly. "When her own credit lines maxed out, she turned to shadow lenders. Unregulated loan sharks operating through cryptocurrency tumblers. The interest rates are astronomical, and the collection methods are highly aggressive." Hayes brought up a decrypted messaging thread. The language on the screen was brutal and threatening. Anonymous senders were demanding immediate liquidation of assets, threatening to seize her property, ruin her husband's medical practice, and expose her massive financial fraud to the local authorities. They gave her a deadline, David noted, his tactical mind analyzing the threat matrix. The final collection notice is dated for next week. She was entirely out of time. The sickening reality of my sister's grand plan crystallized in the cold, sterile room. Brittany was backed into a corner by dangerous, unregulated criminals. She could not ask Jamal for the money because doing so would expose her as a pathological liar who had gambled away their joint savings. It would end her marriage and strip away the high society status she valued above her own family's safety. So she looked for a scapegoat. She looked at me. I stared at the blinking green light of the dismantled device resting in the evidence pouch. The offshore server routing protocols on this device, I said, my voice steadying as the final piece clicked into place. Do they match the crypto wallets associated with those loan sharks? Hayes ran the cross-reference the progress bar loading for 3 agonizing seconds before flashing a solid green match. Yes, direct correlation. The data sniffer was programmed to automatically dump intercepted financial credentials straight to the syndicate's servers. Brittany never intended to steal the money herself. She was literally handing the keys to my corporate portfolios directly to an international criminal syndicate. She was going to let them drain my clients' accounts to wipe her own slate clean. She was going to destroy my career, compromise my entire institution, and risk federal charges against my husband, all to save her own skin and keep Jamal completely in the dark. The sheer gravity of that revelation hung in the air of the interrogation room, heavy and suffocating. Agent Reynolds instructed David and me to return to our home under the strict condition of absolute operational security. The federal gears were turning, but building an airtight prosecution-ready case for corporate espionage and wire fraud required time. We were escorted back to our house by a discreet NCIS security detail. Instead of waking up to the sound of ocean waves crashing against a resort in Maui, I woke up the next morning to my cell phone vibrating violently against my nightstand. It was not a few missed calls, it was an avalanche. My screen was choked with hundreds of notifications, text messages from distant relatives, missed calls from old high school acquaintances, and an endless stream of social media alerts. My heart hammered against my ribs as I unlocked the screen. I opened a message from a trusted coworker. It contained no text, only a single highly shared link. My parents had not waited for the dust to settle. Recognizing that their golden child was trapped in the crosshairs of a federal investigation, Richard and Patricia decided to strike first. They weaponized the one arena where their manipulative tactics always thrived: the court of public opinion. I clicked the link. It directed me to a GoFundMe campaign created by my mother, Patricia. The bold, sensationalized title read, "Help Save My Innocent Daughter from Military Tyranny." A wave of pure nausea washed over me as I read the campaign description. My mother had written a tear-jerking, entirely fabricated manifesto. She painted a picture of a picturesque family wedding, destroyed by an unhinged, violent groom and his aggressive military friends. According to her post, Brittany was simply trying to gift her older sister a beautiful vintage keepsake. In response, Patricia claimed my husband David ordered heavily armed attack dogs to tackle a terrified, defenseless young woman to the ground, holding wedding guests hostage over a harmless misunderstanding. She spun the narrative with sickening precision. She wrote that I was a bitter, jealous sibling who allowed her new husband to terrorize her family to settle petty childhood scores. The page pleaded for public donations to hire a high-powered defense attorney to fight back against military overreach and unlawful detainment. They had attached a photograph of Brittany from a few years ago, looking sweet, tearful, and utterly fragile. The internet, always hungry for a scandal, swallowed the lie whole. The campaign had gone viral overnight. The post had been shared thousands of times across local community pages and national military watchdog forums. The comments section was a terrifying echo chamber of misplaced outrage. Strangers were tearing me apart, calling me a traitor to my own blood, a monster who let her husband abuse a civilian. People were demanding that David be stripped of his rank and court-martialed. Worst of all, the financial counter at the top of the screen showed that gullible, sympathetic strangers had already donated over $50,000 in less than 12 hours. My parents were literally crowdfunding Britney's legal defense through an egregious campaign of digital defamation. Before I could even show the screen to David, my phone screen flashed with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed the name of the chief executive officer of my financial firm. My blood ran cold. The CEO never called employees directly on a Sunday morning. I answered the call, my voice tight. "I need you in the downtown corporate boardroom in exactly 45 minutes, the CEO stated, completely bypassing any standard pleasantries. "Do not log into the company network. Bring your security badge." The line went dead. The drive to the corporate headquarters was a blur of panic and rising fury. When I walked into the sleek glass-walled boardroom, the atmosphere was incredibly hostile. The CEO sat at the head of the long mahogany table. Flanking him were the head of human resources and the chief information security officer. Projected on the massive screen behind them was my mother's viral GoFundMe page. "Have a seat, Maddie." The CEO commanded, his hands steepled in front of him. "We have a monumental public relations nightmare unfolding, and my inbox is flooded with inquiries from our board of directors. Your family is publicly accusing you and your spouse of assault and unlawful imprisonment. Furthermore, there are rumors circulating on social media that the police were called to your wedding due to stolen property." The chief information security officer leaned forward, his expression severe. "Our primary concern is institutional security. You have high-level clearance. You manage the back-end data for portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. If your personal life is compromised by criminal activity or unstable associations, you become a massive liability to this firm. Our local law enforcement officers investigating you." I had to navigate a terrifying tightrope. I needed to defend my job without violating the strict non-disclosure protocols of an active NCIS investigation. "I am not under investigation," I said, keeping my voice as steady and professional as possible. "The individual who was detained at my wedding is currently facing federal charges. I cannot disclose the specific details due to ongoing national security protocols, but I can guarantee you with absolute certainty that our corporate network was never breached. The threat was intercepted and neutralized before it ever reached my hardware." The executives exchanged uneasy glances. The mention of federal charges and national security clearly rattled them, but it did not ease their immediate concern about the viral scandal. "The reality is that your name and face are currently attached to a viral campaign alleging severe misconduct." The head of human resources interjected, sliding a formal document across the polished table. "Our clients require absolute discretion and stability. We cannot have a senior data architect trending on social media for a family brawl involving military personnel." The CEO delivered the final blow. "Effective immediately, you are being placed on indefinite administrative leave. Your corporate network access has already been revoked. Your keycard is deactivated. You will remain on leave until this public relations disaster is entirely resolved and your name is cleared of any association with criminal instability." I stared at the paperwork. The career I had spent 10 agonizing years building suddenly ripped away because of my family's vindictive lies. I was being punished for being the victim of an attempted cyber heist. I signed the acknowledgement form with trembling fingers, handed over my security badge, and was silently escorted out of the building by a corporate security guard. I walked out into the blinding midday sun, feeling as though the ground had been cut out from under me. Brittany and my parents were systematically destroying my life to save themselves. I unlocked my car, sitting in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel as a wave of profound, burning anger finally overtook the shock. I reached into my purse to call David. I needed to tell him what just happened, to tell him that my parents had just cost me my livelihood. Before I could dial his number, the screen lit up with a new text message. It was from an unknown burner number, but I recognized the arrogant, commanding tone instantly. "You think you won because you got the feds involved," the message read. "You just lost your job. Your husband will lose his rank next. Drop the charges today, or I will release the files that will ruin what is left of your miserable life." My fingers tightened around the steering wheel as I read the text message again. "Drop the charges today, or I will release the files that will ruin what is left of your miserable life." Before I could even process the weight of the threat, the burner number flashed across my dashboard display as an incoming call. I took a sharp, steadying breath. I tapped the screen to accept the call, the Bluetooth system filling the quiet interior of my car with the heavy, expectant silence of the open line. "You thought you could outsmart your own family, Maddie?" My father's voice echoed through the speakers. He did not sound like the polished corporate executive he usually portrayed to the world. He sounded venomous, desperate, and entirely ruthless. He had dropped the facade of the concerned parent completely. I sat perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the empty parking space in front of me. "I am not playing a game, Dad," I said, keeping my tone flat and professional. "Brittany committed a federal crime. She targeted a military commander and attempted a massive cyber heist against my firm. This is completely out of my hands now." "Nothing is out of your hands," Richard snapped, his voice rising in volume. "You are the so-called victim. You can refuse to cooperate. You can tell your husband to call off his government attack dogs, and you can tell those federal agents that it was all a giant misunderstanding. You are going to fix this, Maddie, because if you do not, I will destroy your entire career by the end of the business day." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "They beat you to it." I have already been placed on indefinite administrative leave because of the viral GoFundMe campaign Mom launched this morning. "You have already done your worst." "Oh, we have not even scratched the surface of our worst." My father countered, a dark, triumphant edge creeping into his words. "Being placed on administrative leave is temporary. A corporate suspension can be lifted once the public relations storm blows over. But what I am holding in my hands right now is permanent. I have the files, Maddie." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "What files?" I asked, refusing to let him hear any fear in my voice. "Your medical history," Richard stated smoothly. "Specifically the psychiatric evaluations from when you were 22 years old." The air in my lungs froze. During my early 20s, the relentless emotional abuse and gaslighting from my parents and Brittany had pushed me to the brink of a severe depressive episode. I had sought help at a private mental health clinic to survive the toxic environment they had created. I attended therapy for a year to rebuild my self-worth before finally moving out and cutting them off financially. It was the hardest, most vulnerable period of my life. "Those records are sealed by medical privacy laws," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "You have no legal access to them. Legal access is just a matter of knowing the right people and paying the right price," my father boasted, completely unashamed of his corruption. "But the original records were a bit too boring for my taste. They just said you had anxiety and depression. That does not really fit the narrative your mother and I are building online. So I had a specialist enhance your files." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "Enhance them how?" "According to these newly updated documents," Richard said, reading clearly from a piece of paper, "you have a long documented history of severe paranoid delusions. You suffer from pathological lying, violent tendencies, and extreme jealousy directed specifically at your younger sister. The documents state that you require heavy medication to maintain a grip on reality, medication you apparently stopped taking shortly before your wedding." "You forged my medical records to make me look insane," I whispered, the sheer depravity of his actions hitting me like a physical blow. "You are committing extortion and medical fraud to protect a daughter who is trying to steal from illegal loan sharks." "I am protecting my family!" Richard roared, his anger flaring up again. "Brittany made a stupid mistake with some crypto investments. That does not mean she deserves to rot in a federal prison. You have millions of dollars in those corporate accounts you manage. You could have easily covered her debt if she asked, but we knew you would be too selfish to help your own sister. So she had to find another way." He was actually blaming me for Brittany's attempted cyber heist. In his twisted, narcissistic mind, my refusal to be their personal ATM justified my sister committing a federal crime against my husband and my employer. "If you do not call the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and drop every single charge against Brittany by 5 o'clock today," Richard continued, laying out his ultimatum with cold precision, "I am sending this forged psychiatric dossier directly to the chief executive officer of your financial firm. I will send it to the board of directors. I will send it to the journalists who are currently eating up our GoFundMe campaign." We will paint you as a completely unhinged, delusional woman who orchestrated this entire military raid because of a psychotic break. You will never work in data architecture again. No financial institution will ever trust you with security clearance. You will lose your career, your reputation, and your income permanently. He paused, letting the heavy weight of his threat settle over the line. I know how much your career means to you, Maddie. It is the only thing you have ever been good at. Do not throw it away out of spite. Fix this. Call off the feds. I sat in the driver's seat listening to the static hum of the Bluetooth connection. 10 years ago, a threat like this would have broken me. 10 years ago, the terrified, insecure girl who just wanted her parents to love her would have folded immediately, sacrificing her own safety to keep the peace. But I was not that girl anymore. I was a 33-year-old woman who had built a lucrative career entirely on my own merit. I was the wife of a Navy SEAL commander who had shown me what absolute uncompromising loyalty looked like. I understood data, I understood logic, and I understood the law. My father was banking on my fear. He was relying on the old family dynamic where he held all the power. He did not realize that extortion across state lines using a telecommunications device was a federal offense. He was blindly adding his own name to the federal indictment list. Richard was waiting for me to cry. He was waiting for me to beg. Instead, a profound, unshakable calm washed over me. The last remaining thread of familial obligation I held for the man on the other end of the line snapped cleanly in two. "Are you listening to me, Maddie?" My father demanded, his impatience bleeding through the speaker. "You have until 5 o'clock. I reached forward and pressed my finger over the red end call button on my dashboard screen. "Bring it on, Dad," I said. I ended the call, shifting my car into gear. I was done playing defense. I was ready for war. I pulled into my driveway less than 20 minutes after ending the call with my father. My hands were still buzzing with a mixture of leftover adrenaline and absolute clarity. The house was quiet, the heavy oak front door securely locked. When I stepped inside, I found David standing in our living room, his arms crossed over his chest. He was staring at a large flat panel monitor mounted on the wall, which was currently divided into a grid of high-definition security feeds covering every conceivable angle of our property. I walked over to him, dropping my keys on the counter. "My dad just called me from a burner phone," I said, not wasting a single second on pleasantries. "He forged psychiatric evaluations from when I was 22. He is threatening to release documents claiming I have violent paranoid delusions to my corporate board and the press if we do not drop the federal charges against Brittany by 5 o'clock. David did not look surprised. He did not panic. A slow, dangerous smile crept onto his face, a look that told me he had been anticipating a desperate move. Extortion across state lines. David noted his voice carrying that familiar, icy tactical calm. "Forging medical records. Witness intimidation. Your father is quite literally handing the federal prosecutor a guaranteed conviction with a bow on top." I looked at the monitor. The cameras provided crystal clear views of our driveway, the street, the backyard, and the perimeter fences. I told him to bring it on. I admitted, stepping closer to my husband. David turned to me, his eyes gleaming with fierce pride. "Good. Because they are already here." A soft melodic chime echoed from the security console. On the top left grid of the monitor, a silver luxury SUV aggressively swerved onto our quiet suburban street. It did not pull into the driveway. Instead, it parked horizontally across the curb, deliberately blocking the entrance. The doors flew open. Richard, Patricia, and Brittany stepped out onto the pavement. They looked entirely different from the arrogant high society snobs who had tried to command the room at my wedding reception just 24 hours prior. Patricia was wearing a wrinkled cardigan, her hair intentionally messy. Richard had discarded his expensive suit jacket and tie, his shirt collar unbuttoned to look disheveled and frantic. Brittany was the star of the show. She held a smartphone mounted on a stabilizing gimbal, pointing the camera directly at her own face. Her eyes were red and puffy, streaming with fresh, perfectly calculated tears. "They are live streaming," I realized, watching Brittany stare mournfully into her phone screen as they began their slow march up our driveway. David tapped a key on his security console. The audio feed from the exterior perimeter instantly flooded our living room in crisp, lossless surround sound. "We are walking up to the house right now," Brittany whimpered to her digital audience, her voice trembling with manufactured terror. "If you are just joining the stream, my sister is trapped inside with her new husband. We just want to make sure she is safe. He is a trained military killer, and he had his friends attack me yesterday. We are so scared, but we have to try to reach her." Patricia flanked her right side, looking nervously at our front door. "Please, Maddie," Patricia wailed, performing for the thousands of strangers tuning into their GoFundMe sympathy broadcast. "We love you so much. Please come outside. We know he is controlling you." I stood in my living room, absolutely stunned by the sheer audacity of their performance. They were actually trying to frame a Navy SEAL commander for domestic imprisonment to save themselves from a federal cyber heist indictment. It was a staggering display of narcissistic delusion. They wanted David to open the front door, lose his temper, and yell at them so they could capture an angry, aggressive military man on camera to validate their smear campaign. But they had made a fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. David's house was not a standard suburban build. As a high-ranking military official who frequently handled classified intelligence from his home office, his property was fortified with a security system designed by defense contractors. It did not just record video, it featured highly sensitive multi-directional parabolic microphones hidden inside the porch light fixtures, the driveway pillars, and the decorative stone planters. On the security monitor, the trio paused halfway up the driveway. Brittany lowered the phone, slightly pointing the camera at our front door to show her viewers the imposing silent house. Assuming they were momentarily off microphone, their entire demeanor shifted in the blink of an eye. The fake tears vanished. "Make sure you get the address numbers in the frame," Richard hissed under his breath, his voice harsh and demanding. "I am trying," Brittany snapped back, aggressively wiping a tear from her cheek. "Just get ready. If that muscle-bound freak opens the door, you two need to start screaming immediately. Make him look as aggressive as possible. The donation counter on the page just hit $60,000. Keep crying, Mom." Patricia adjusted her wrinkled cardigan, her face twisting into a nasty sneer. "If that little brat does not answer the door, I am going to throw a rock through the front window," Patricia muttered. "We need footage of a confrontation before the 5 o'clock deadline, or Richard's blackmail threat is useless." They took a breath, perfectly resetting their faces into masks of utter devastation, and raised the camera back up. "Maddie, please," Brittany wailed, resuming her performance flawlessly as they stepped onto our front porch. "We are begging you, come outside." Inside the living room, David and I stood side by side, listening to the crystal-clear, high-definition audio of their whispered conspiracy echoing through our speakers. Every single threat, every admission of blackmail, every piece of undeniable proof that their live stream was a premeditated, fraudulent shakedown had just been captured and automatically uploaded to a secure cloud server. "They marched right into a trap," I whispered, staring at the monitor, in awe. "They dug their own graves," David corrected, crossing his arms and watching my family bang furiously on our heavy front door. "And we are going to let them keep digging. We do not engage, we do not answer, we just collect the evidence." Richard began pounding his fist against the oak door, shouting for the camera. "David Thorne, open this door. We have a right to see our daughter. Stop holding her hostage." The hypocrisy was nauseating. The man screaming about my safety was the exact same man who had threatened to destroy my career with forged mental health records less than half an hour ago. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime, entirely unaware that the stage they were standing on was recording their every malicious whisper. Suddenly, the sharp, aggressive screech of tires cutting a corner too fast interrupted my father's shouting. On the security monitor, a sleek black sedan tore down the street, braking violently right behind my parents' parked SUV. David leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at the screen. "We have another visitor." The driver's side door of the sedan flew open. A tall man stepped out, moving with a fast, purposeful stride that radiated absolute fury. He slammed the car door shut, not even bothering to grab his suit jacket from the passenger seat. It was Jamal, and he did not look like he was here to participate in a family live stream. Jamal marched up the driveway with heavy, deliberate steps. He wore his teal surgical scrubs under an unbuttoned dress shirt, an indication that he had left the hospital in an absolute blinding rush. On the high-definition monitor inside our living room, David and I watched the entire dynamic on our front porch shatter. Patricia, oblivious to the storm brewing right behind her, kept her face pressed into her hands, wailing for the camera. Richard was mid-sentence shouting another threat at our front door when he finally noticed his son-in-law approaching. My father immediately adjusted his posture, attempting to rope Jamal into their twisted production. "Jamal, thank God you are here." Richard projected his voice for the livestream audience, pointing dramatically at our house. "We are trying to get Maddie out of there. David has completely lost it. He is keeping her locked inside. Tell the viewers what happened at the wedding." Jamal did not even blink at my father. He walked straight past Richard, completely ignoring the older man, as if he were nothing more than a piece of lawn furniture. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of Brittany. Brittany lowered the smartphone slightly, her fake tears drying up the instant she saw her husband's face. The sheer, unadulterated rage radiating from Jamal was terrifying. This was not the calm, collected orthopedic surgeon who spent his weekends playing golf with my parents. This was a man who had just had his entire reality ripped out from under him. "Jamal, what are you doing here?" Brittany asked, her voice hitching. She instinctively took a step back, hitting the brick facade of our porch. "We are in the middle of a broadcast. We are trying to save my sister." "How did you find me?" she added, her eyes darting nervously toward his sedan parked on the curb. "I put a GPS tracker on your luxury SUV," Jamal stated. His voice was dangerously low, perfectly captured by David's hidden parabolic microphones. Patricia gasped, clutching her pearls. "Jamal, that is a massive violation of privacy. How dare you track your own wife like a common criminal?" Jamal slowly turned his head to look at my mother. The absolute disgust in his eyes made Patricia physically recoil. "I tracked her," Jamal said, his tone lethal, "because when I logged into my corporate banking portal this morning to process payroll for my surgical staff, I discovered our joint practice account had been completely drained." The silence that followed was absolute. Inside the living room, David let out a low whistle. They did not just lose her personal savings, she stole from his business. Brittany swallowed hard, her knuckles turning white around her smartphone. The live stream was still running, capturing every second of her public unraveling. "Jamal, baby, you are confused," she stammered, attempting a weak, placating smile. "It is just a banking error. The bank probably froze the account because of the investigation yesterday. We can call them tomorrow and sort it out. Please do not do this right now. We have thousands of people watching. We need to focus on saving Maddie." Jamal closed the distance between them, towering over his wife. "I did call the bank, Brittany. I spent 3 hours on the phone with the fraud department. They did not freeze the account. They traced 4 wire transfers authorized by your secure digital token, 4 transfers sent to unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchanges over the last 30 days. He stepped closer, his voice rising, vibrating with a fury that shook the windows. "You did not just gamble away our personal savings. You liquidated the operational funds for my medical practice. You stole from my partners. You stole from the people who work for me. You committed massive financial fraud against my business." Richard stepped forward, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Now, Jamal, let us not say things we cannot take back. Brittany just made a small mistake with some investments. We are a family. We can fix this quietly. We do not need to air our dirty laundry in public." "A small mistake," Jamal roared, whirling on my father. He pointed a finger directly at Richard's chest. "Do not you dare stand there and protect her. I know you knew about this. The bank flagged a secondary transfer routing straight to a holding account under your name, Richard. You used my surgical practice to pay off your own debts." I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. Inside our living room, the full scope of my family's depravity finally clicked into place. Richard was not just covering for Brittany out of blind parental devotion. He was actively complicit. They had teamed up to drain Jamal's business accounts to pay off the loan sharks, and when that money ran out, they tried to plant the espionage device to drain my corporate funds next. It was a coordinated family syndicate of financial ruin. Brittany realized the game was entirely up. Her husband knew everything. Her father's complicity was exposed. And the live stream, the very tool she was using to destroy my life, was currently broadcasting her own destruction to an audience of thousands. She panicked. She raised the phone higher, trying to angle the camera away from Jamal and back toward our front door. Guys, Jamal is just stressed, Brittany babbled to the camera, her voice frantic and breathless. He is not thinking straight. The military men must have threatened him. We have to call the police to save Maddie. Help us. Please keep donating. Jamal stared at her, utterly repulsed by the creature she had become. She was backed into a corner facing federal charges and absolute financial ruin, and her only instinct was to keep begging strangers for money on the internet. He did not say another word. Jamal simply reached forward with a violent, unrestrained surge of motion. He ripped the phone right out of Brittany's hand mid-livestream. Brittany screamed as the device was torn from her grip. The camera angle spun wildly, capturing a blur of the brick wall, the sky, and Patricia's horrified face, before Jamal's massive hand covered the lens completely. The video feed on our security monitor went black, but the high-definition audio feed kept recording every single decibel. "What did you do with my money, Brittany?" Jamal threw the smartphone against the concrete porch with shattering force. The sickening crunch of breaking glass and snapping electronics cut through the air, silencing my mother's wailing instantly. The live stream was dead, but our security microphones captured every frantic breath. "Answer me," Jamal roared, his voice trembling with a rage that seemed to shake the very foundation of our porch. "Where's the $400,000, Brittany? Where is the operational capital for my surgical practice?" Brittany shrank back against the brick wall, her hands raised defensively. The polished, manipulative golden child was completely gone. She was a terrified, cornered rat. "Jamal, you are scaring me," she whimpered, trying to retreat behind my father. "Please, it was a mistake. I was trying to invest it. I wanted to double the money so we could buy the beach house you always wanted." "You stole money from my business partners to play the crypto market," Jamal demanded, stepping closer and forcing Richard to awkwardly shuffle sideways. "You forged my signature on the wire transfers. Do you understand that is a federal offense? The FBI is already reviewing the routing numbers." The mention of the FBI broke her. The reality of a federal investigation stacked on top of the NCIS probe into her espionage attempt at my wedding crushed whatever remaining sanity she clung to. Brittany dropped to her knees right there on the concrete porch, sobbing hysterically. "I did not want to do it," she screamed, her voice cracking as she pointed a shaking accusatory finger directly at Richard. "He made me. Dad told me to do it." Richard's face drained of blood, turning a sickly ashen gray. "Brittany, shut your mouth right now," he commanded, his voice tight with rising panic. "You do not know what you are saying. You are hysterical." "I am not lying," Brittany shrieked, scrambling backward like a crab to put distance between herself and her father. He was in debt. He owed the same loan sharks I did. They were threatening to break his legs if he did not pay up by the end of the month. "He told me to drain your practice account, Jamal. He said you made so much money you would never notice it was missing." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. She whipped around to face her husband, her eyes wide with absolute horror. "Richard," she breathed, her voice trembling. "What is she talking about? What loan sharks?" Richard tried to grab Patricia's arm, but she violently recoiled. "Patty, listen to me," he pleaded, his corporate facade completely dissolving into pathetic desperation. "The girl is unhinged. She is trying to drag me down to save herself. You know she is a liar." "She is telling the truth," Jamal stated coldly, his eyes fixed on my father with utter contempt. The bank traced a transfer of $150,000 directly from my stolen funds into a holding account registered to a shell corporation. A corporation with your name listed as the primary beneficiary, Richard. You took the money. Patricia stared at her husband, the life they had built together unspooling before her eyes. For decades they had projected the image of the perfect, wealthy suburban family. They had looked down on me constantly, reminding me of my failures while parading their own success. Now the grotesque truth was laid bare on my front porch. "You have a gambling problem," Patricia whispered, the realization hitting her with devastating clarity. "You told me you stopped going to the casinos 5 years ago. You swore on our marriage." "I had a bad run, Patty." Richard snapped, his temper flaring as the walls closed in. "I was trying to win back the money I lost in the real estate crash. It got out of hand. I borrowed from the wrong people. They were going to hurt me. I had to do something." "So you told your daughter to steal from her husband?" Patricia screamed, finally finding her voice. "You told her to steal from my son-in-law to pay off your dirty debts." And when that money ran out, Brittany yelled, desperate to deflect the blame entirely onto her father. "He told me to go after Maddie. He bought the tracking device. He told me to plant it at her wedding so we could get her corporate passwords. He said Maddie's clients had hundreds of millions of dollars and she would take the fall." The complete and utter depravity of their conspiracy hung heavily in the air. Inside the living room, David and I stood in stunned silence. My father had not just covered for Brittany. He was the mastermind. He had orchestrated the theft of his son-in-law's business and directed a cyber attack against my financial firm, fully intending to let me take the blame and face federal prison just to cover his gambling debts. Jamal looked at the family he had married into a look of profound disgust crossing his features. "You are all repulsive," he said quietly. "Every single one of you. I am going to the FBI field office right now. I am handing over every financial record, every bank statement, and every piece of evidence I have against you." Jamal turned on his heel and began walking down the driveway toward his sedan. He did not look back. He did not care about the shattered phone, the ruined live stream, or the sobbing woman on the porch. He was a man cutting a cancerous rot out of his life. "Wait! Jamal, please!" Brittany wailed, scrambling to her feet and stumbling down the driveway after him. "You cannot leave me here. They will kill me. The loan sharks will kill me." Before she could reach his car, the distant wail of sirens pierced the suburban quiet. The sound was not the familiar rising and falling tone of local police cruisers. It was the heavy, aggressive blare of federal enforcement vehicles. At the end of the street, 4 matte black SUVs turned the corner simultaneously, moving in a tight tactical formation. They accelerated rapidly, their tires screeching as they swarmed the front of our property, completely blocking the driveway, and boxing in both Jamal's sedan and my parents' luxury SUV. The doors of the federal vehicles flew open in perfect unison. A dozen heavily armed agents poured out onto the street, their tactical vests emblazoned with bold yellow letters, NCIS. Following closely behind them were several agents wearing FBI jackets. The raid had officially begun. Agent Reynolds stepped out of the lead vehicle, his tactical boots hitting the asphalt with a heavy, authoritative thud. Behind him, a dozen federal agents fanned out across my meticulously manicured lawn, their weapons drawn and held at the low ready. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles bounced off the brick facade of my home, turning the quiet suburban street into a chaotic, active crime scene. Inside, David tapped the security console, disengaging the electronic deadbolts. "Let us go," he said, his voice a low, satisfied rumble. "Time to watch the finale." We stepped out onto the porch together, standing safely behind the invisible line the agents had quickly formed. The evening air was cool, but the atmosphere on our driveway was absolutely scorching. "Richard Vance and Brittany Vance," Agent Reynolds barked, projecting his voice over the aggressive hum of the idling engines. "We possess federal search and seizure warrants authorized by a United States District Judge. Place your hands on top of your heads and interlock your fingers immediately." My father stared at the wall of federal agents, his corporate arrogance flaring up for one last pathetic stand. He lowered his hands, puffing out his chest as if he were addressing a subordinate in a boardroom rather than an armed federal task force. "Now see here," Agent Richard announced, attempting to project authority. "There has been a massive misunderstanding. I am a respected corporate executive. I demand to speak to my legal counsel before you take another step onto my daughter's property." "You are currently standing on a federal crime scene," Richard Agent Reynolds replied, his tone entirely devoid of patience. You are a primary suspect in a coordinated cyber espionage attempt against a military official, combined with interstate wire fraud and illegal gambling operations. Hands on your head right now, or you will be placed on the ground. Richard swallowed hard, his bravado shattering into a million pieces. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. He slowly raised his trembling hands, interlacing his fingers over his thinning hair. Two agents advanced, swiftly patting him down. They pulled his leather wallet, his car keys, and his sleek corporate smartphone from his pockets. Then an agent patted his ankle and pulled up the hem of his tailored trousers, extracting the cheap plastic burner phone he had used to blackmail me just an hour prior. I watched the exact device used to threaten my career get sealed inside a clear federal evidence bag. A profound, chilling sense of victory washed over me. Patricia watched her husband being searched like a common street criminal. She let out a piercing shriek, clutching her chest dramatically. "You cannot do this to us!" she wailed, stomping her foot on the pavement. "We are victims here. Our daughter and her violent husband are holding us hostage." An FBI agent pointed a stern, unyielding finger at her. "Ma'am, step back. Any attempt to interfere with the execution of a federal warrant will result in your immediate arrest for obstruction of justice." Patricia crumpled onto the edge of the driveway, her expensive cardigan trailing in the dirty gravel. The pristine, untouchable image she had curated for her entire life was entirely eradicated. The agents then turned their attention to Brittany. She was still kneeling on the concrete, staring vacantly at the shattered remains of the smartphone Jamal had destroyed minutes earlier. "Stand up," a female NCIS agent commanded. Brittany staggered to her feet, her beaded gown torn and filthy. "He broke my phone," she whimpered, pointing a shaking finger at Jamal. Jamal was standing quietly near his sedan, watching the scene with total icy detachment. "My husband broke my phone. I do not have anything else to give you. We are not just here for your phone," Agent Reynolds stated, waving a hand toward the silver luxury SUV my parents had driven. Agents were already swarming the vehicle. They popped the trunk and pulled out a designer leather laptop bag. "Hey, that is my bag!" Brittany shrieked. The sight of her precious luxury items being handled by federal authorities snapped her out of her terrified daze. "My laptop is in there. My tablet is in there. You cannot take those. My whole life is on those drives." "Your digital footprint is now federal evidence," Reynolds explained coldly. "Your cryptocurrency ledgers, your offshore communications, and your illegal loan shark communications are subject to immediate seizure under this warrant." The female agent stepped closer to my sister, holding out an evidence bag. "Remove the smartwatch and hand it over. Now." Brittany looked down at her wrist. Her smartwatch was a limited edition diamond-encrusted piece that she paraded around social media to prove her wealth and status. Losing her phone, her laptop, and her secret bank accounts was one thing, but physically handing over her ultimate luxury status symbol pushed her completely over the edge. She snapped. The spoiled, entitled golden child who had never faced a single consequence in her entire life lost her grip on reality. "No." Brittany screamed, her voice tearing through the neighborhood. "You cannot have it! You are ruining my life!" Instead of complying, Brittany lunged. She raised her hands, curling her fingers into claws, and physically struck out at the federal agent, aiming a wild, desperate scratch directly at the woman's face. It was the worst mistake she could possibly make. The agent did not flinch. With terrifying calculated speed, she deflected Brittany's sloppy strike, grabbed her extended arm, and spun her around. Using Brittany's own momentum against her, the agent drove her forward, slamming her chest and face violently against the cold steel hood of my parents' luxury SUV. The heavy metallic thud of the impact echoed across the driveway, instantly silencing my mother's wailing. It was followed immediately by the sharp, undeniable click of federal handcuffs locking tightly around my sister's wrists. Brittany screamed obscenities, her face pressed awkwardly against the hood of the SUV. The agent ignored her, thrashing expertly, snapping off the diamond-encrusted smartwatch and dropping it into the evidence bag. The reality of the metal biting into her wrists finally broke through her adrenaline-fueled panic. The golden child was officially under arrest. Patricia, still crumpled on the gravel, seemed to find a final burst of desperate energy. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes darting wildly around the chaotic scene. She looked at Richard, who was staring blankly at the ground, a defeated, broken man. She looked at me, standing safely beside David on the porch, my expression entirely impassive. Finding no sympathy there, she whipped around to face her son-in-law. Jamal, Patricia wailed, stumbling toward him with outstretched hands. You have to do something. They are hurting her. You are a respected surgeon. You have connections. Call your lawyers. Tell them you will pay whatever it takes for bail. We need to get her out of here. Jamal stood perfectly still. He did not step forward to comfort my mother, nor did he shrink away. He simply let her frantic demands wash over him. He looked at Brittany struggling against the hood of the car and then at Richard, the man who had actively orchestrated the theft of his hard-earned operational funds. Patricia grabbed his arm, shaking it. Jamal, please, she is your wife. You cannot let them take her away like this. Jamal slowly, deliberately removed her hand from his arm. His expression was a terrifying mask of controlled anger and absolute disgust. He straightened his shoulders and looked Patricia dead in the eye. She is not my wife, Jamal said, his voice carrying the calm, steady authority of a man making a life-altering decision. She is a criminal who stole from my business partners, lied to my face, and attempted to commit federal espionage against her own family. I am not paying a single cent for her bail, Patricia. In fact, my lawyers are currently drafting the divorce papers. You and Richard created this monster. Now you can watch her face the consequences. Patricia gasped, stumbling backward, as if Jamal had physically struck her. But you promised to protect her, she sobbed, clutching her chest. You made vows, and she shattered every single one of them the moment she used my practice as her personal piggy bank to pay off a gambling debt. Jamal shot back, his tone absolutely lethal. Do not you dare talk to me about vows. Your entire family is a fraud. He turned his back on my mother completely. He walked across the driveway, bypassing the chaotic scene of agents cataloging evidence, and headed straight for the porch where David and I stood. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at us. The fury in his eyes softened, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. Maddie. David Jamal said, his voice heavy with regret. I owe you both a massive apology. David gave a short, understanding nod. You did not know, Jamal. This was orchestrated to keep you in the dark. I should have seen it, Jamal insisted, shaking his head. I saw the superficiality. I saw the entitlement. I told myself she was just spoiled, that she would outgrow it. I willfully ignored the red flags because I wanted to believe the image your parents projected. I am incredibly sorry for what she tried to do to you, Maddie. And I am sorry for bringing that threat into your home, David. I stepped forward, looking down at the man who had been used just as ruthlessly as I had. You are a victim in this too, Jamal, I said gently. They used my name as a scapegoat, but they used your livelihood to fund their lies. You do not owe us an apology for their actions. Jamal offered a small, humorless smile. I appreciate that, Maddie. But I am not going to be a passive victim. I am going to make sure they never have the opportunity to destroy another life. He reached into the pocket of his dress shirt and pulled out a small, sleek metal flash drive. He turned and walked back down the driveway, approaching Agent Reynolds, who was coordinating the seizure of Richard's electronics. Agent Reynolds, Jamal called out, holding up the flash drive. The agent paused, turning to face him. Can I help you, Dr. Vance? Jamal held out the drive, his expression resolute. I understand you have a warrant for my wife's electronics. This is a complete encrypted backup of my entire home network. It contains the mirrored hard drives of her personal desktop, complete logs of our joint financial accounts, and automated backups of every device connected to our Wi-Fi. I created it this morning when I discovered the missing funds from my practice. Agent Reynolds raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the proactive cooperation. Dr. Vance, you understand that voluntarily handing this over means we will have unrestricted access to all data contained within, including potentially incriminating evidence against your wife. I understand completely, Jamal stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. I want you to have unrestricted access. Take whatever you need to lock her up. Agent Reynolds accepts the sleek metal flash drive from Jamal with a curt, appreciative nod. He slides the device into a heavy plastic evidence bag, sealing it with a loud, tearing zip that echoes across the quiet suburban street. That sound is the absolute death knell for my family. Richard watches this exchange from the side of his luxury SUV. The color completely drains from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent white. The blustering corporate executive facade, the mask of superiority he wore my entire life, shatters into jagged pieces. The reality of a concrete cell, the loss of his elite country club status, the absolute public humiliation crushes the air from his lungs. He is a man staring down the barrel of a multi-decade federal sentence, and the weight of it physically breaks him. Ignoring the federal agents who are busy logging his confiscated burner phone, Richard breaks away. He stumbles up the gravel driveway toward the porch where David and I are standing. An NCIS agent immediately steps forward to intercept him, reaching a gloved hand toward his tactical belt, but David raises a single commanding hand. The agent pauses, allowing Richard to close the distance, though keeping a watchful, hawk-like gaze on my father's erratic movements. Richard does not march up the stairs. His knees hit the hard concrete at the base of the porch with a sickening heavy thud. The sharp gravel bites into his tailored trousers, tearing the expensive fabric. He looks up at me, his face slick with a disgusting mixture of sweat and tears of pure selfish terror. "Maddie, please," Richard begs. His voice cracks into a pathetic, high-pitched whine that I have never heard from him in my 33 years of life. "You have to stop this. You have to call them off. You have the power to fix this right now." I look down at the man who raised me. This is the man who spent my entire childhood comparing me to the sister who is currently handcuffed against the hood of a car. This is the man who threatened to destroy my career with forged psychiatric evaluations just an hour ago. I do not feel an ounce of pity. "I cannot call off federal agents, Richard," I state coldly, refusing to use his parental title. "You committed federal crimes. This is not a spilled glass of milk. You attempted corporate espionage. You tried to infiltrate a military household. It was just money." He sobs, crawling forward on his knees, until his hands grip the bottom step of my porch. He clasps his fingers together, as if praying to a deity he never actually believed in. "It is just a number on a screen to you. You manage portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. $400,000 is pocket change for your firm. You could have covered the debt without anyone ever noticing. You can still cover it." The sheer delusion of his request leaves me momentarily speechless. David shifts his weight beside me, his sheer physical presence causing Richard to cower slightly, but my father's desperation overrides his fear. "Pay the loan sharks, Maddie." Richard pleads, his voice growing increasingly hysterical. "Pay them so they do not kill me. Pay them, and we will leave you alone forever. We will sign whatever you want. I am your father. You have the money, Maddie. Save us." I stare at him in absolute, unadulterated disgust. He still thinks money is the only thing that matters. He still believes my hard-earned career is nothing more than a personal slush fund for his illegal gambling addiction. "You want me to commit federal embezzlement to pay off illegal criminal syndicates," I say, making sure my voice carries clearly so the NCIS agents can record every single word of his spontaneous confession. "You want me to steal from my clients, risk my own freedom, and throw away 10 years of my life to bail you out of a mess you created because you could not stop feeding money into an offshore casino." Patricia, still sitting in the dirt near the federal vehicles, lets out a fresh, agonizing wail. She finally realizes that the wealth and status she worshipped above her own children are completely, irrevocably gone. Her husband is begging on his knees, exposing the ugly, rotting core of their marriage and their finances to the entire neighborhood. "We are blood," Richard pleads, tears dripping from his chin onto his expensive shirt collar. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head when you were a child. You owe us your loyalty. If you let these agents lock me up, you are destroying your own family. You will have to live with that heavy guilt for the rest of your life. Please, Maddie, just write the check, save your family." Or I step to the very edge of the porch. looking directly down into the eyes of the groveling, pathetic man weeping at my feet. I feel no guilt. I feel no obligation. The phantom chains of childhood trauma and parental expectation dissolve entirely in the cool evening air. You stopped being my father the day you tried to frame my husband, I say, my voice ringing with absolute unshakable finality. The initial shockwave of the federal raid subsided into a tense, agonizing quiet over the following 3 weeks. Brittany and Richard were released on federal bail, their passports confiscated and their movements restricted by electronic monitoring ankle bracelets. The GoFundMe campaign my mother had launched was still active somehow, managing to amass nearly $100,000 from sympathetic strangers who bought into the narrative of a bullied innocent family. They were using every single cent of that fraudulent money to retain one of the most aggressive, high-priced defense attorneys in the state. I was still on indefinite administrative leave from my firm. The corporate executives were terrified of the optics paralyzed by the sheer volume of negative attention my parents' smear campaign had generated. My career, the life I had spent a decade building from scratch, hung by a thread. Then came the formal letter. It was delivered to our house via certified courier embossed with the gold crest of a notoriously cutthroat law firm. David stood beside me in the kitchen as I broke the seal and scanned the heavy cream-colored paper. It was a demand for a private mediation meeting. "They are offering a settlement," I said, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. "Brittany and my parents want to meet at their lawyer's office downtown. They are claiming they want to resolve the family dispute amicably to avoid a protracted legal battle that will, quote, damage the reputations of all parties involved, unquote." David let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "They do not want an amicable resolution. They are terrified of federal prison. This is a shakedown." I flipped to the second page of the document, and my blood ran completely cold. Attached to the formal mediation demand was a photocopy of a single, highly redacted document. It was a summary page from a psychiatric evaluation dated 11 years ago. The words paranoid delusions, violent ideations, and pathological instability were highlighted in bright yellow marker. It was the forged medical record my father had threatened me with over the burner phone. There was a handwritten note clipped to the top of the page. The handwriting belonged to their defense attorney, Maddie. The note read, "We strongly advise you to attend this mediation and sign a comprehensive liability waiver dismissing all charges and civil claims against your family. If an agreement cannot be reached by Friday afternoon, my clients feel they have a moral obligation to release your complete medical history to your employer and the press to explain the unstable, aggressive nature of the military raid at the wedding. Save your career. Sign the waiver." They were officially weaponizing the fake documents. They were using the GoFundMe money to pay a lawyer to execute a coordinated, documented blackmail scheme. They truly believed that because my career was currently suspended, I was desperate enough to fold. They thought the threat of public humiliation and permanent job loss would force me to walk into that law office and sign away my right to justice. David looked at the forged document, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "This crosses a line from desperate defense strategy into explicit witness intimidation and federal extortion." I stared at the highlighted words, the cruel, fabricated lies designed to destroy the only thing I had ever truly owned: my professional reputation. My family had spent my entire life trying to make me feel crazy, trying to convince me that my boundaries were actually symptoms of a broken mind. Now they were trying to legally codify that gaslighting to save themselves. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the lead NCIS agent handling the case. "Agent Reynolds," I said when he answered, my voice steady and resolute. "My family's defense attorney just sent a formal mediation request. They attached a forged psychiatric evaluation and stated in writing that they will release it to the press if I do not sign a liability waiver dropping all charges." There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the sound of Reynolds shifting in his chair. "That is a bold move," Reynolds noted, his tone turning razor sharp. "Extortion is a direct violation of their bail conditions. Are you willing to attend this mediation, Maddie?" I looked at David. He gave me a slow, predatory nod. "Yes," I replied. "I will meet them at their lawyer's office on Friday afternoon. Let them think they have won." "Excellent," Reynolds said. We will coordinate with the federal prosecutor's office. I suggest you dress for a victory lap. Friday afternoon arrived with a stifling, oppressive humidity. The defense attorney's office was located in a sleek, modern glass high-rise in the center of the financial district, projecting an aura of untouchable wealth and power. I did not wear a sharp business suit. I did not want to look like a desperate corporate employee fighting to save her job. I wore a simple, elegant navy dress projecting an image of absolute, unshakable calm. I walked into the lavish reception area alone. The receptionist, a young woman with a tight professional smile, immediately escorted me into a massive glass-walled conference room overlooking the city skyline. My family was already seated at the long mahogany table. Patricia sat rigidly, her hands folded primly in her lap, trying to project the image of a wronged matriarch. Richard sat beside her, looking smug and overly confident, entirely believing his forged documents were the ultimate trump card. Brittany sat at the far end, refusing to look at me, her fingers drumming nervously against the polished wood. Their defense attorney, an older man with slicked-back silver hair and an aggressive, predatory demeanor, stood at the head of the table. He gestured to the empty chair across from them. "Have a seat, Maddie," the attorney said smoothly, tapping a thick file folder resting in front of him. "I am glad you decided to be reasonable. We have prepared the non-disclosure agreements and the liability waivers. Once you sign these, effectively retracting your statements to federal investigators, my clients will ensure your medical records remain entirely confidential and your corporate suspension will likely be lifted by Monday morning." I remained standing near the heavy glass doors. I did not reach for the chair. I did not look at the waivers. I looked directly at my father. "You actually paid a lawyer to blackmail me," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying clearly across the expansive room. "You forged medical documents and put it in writing." Richard leaned back in his leather chair, a nasty, victorious smirk spreading across his face. "It is not blackmail, Maddie. It is a negotiation. You pushed us into a corner, and we are simply using the leverage we have. Sign the papers. You protect your precious little career, and we get our lives back. It is a win-win." I tilted my head, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. The sheer blinding arrogance of my father was his ultimate undoing. He truly believed he was the smartest man in the room. "I am not signing anything, Dad," I stated clearly. The defense attorney frowned, his slick demeanor faltering. "Maddie, if you do not sign these waivers, we will immediately release the psychiatric evaluations. Your career will be over." I took a slow, deliberate step backward. I reached behind me and pushed the heavy glass doors open wide. "I do not think you will be releasing anything," I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "Because you do not have leverage. You have a federal indictment." The doors swung open. David walked into the conference room, his presence instantly dominating the space. But he was not alone. Flanking him was Special Agent Reynolds, looking lethal in a dark suit, and a woman carrying a thick sealed briefcase with the seal of the United States Department of Justice emblazoned on the front. The federal prosecutor had arrived. The suffocating silence that followed the federal prosecutor's entrance was absolute. The atmosphere in the conference room shifted from arrogant confidence to sheer, unadulterated terror in a fraction of a second. Richard's triumphant smirk completely vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of horror as he stared at the government seal on the briefcase. Patricia gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning bone white, while Brittany sank lower into her leather chair, trying to make herself invisible. Their high-priced defense attorney, the man who had confidently orchestrated this blackmail attempt, stood frozen at the head of the table. His slick, predatory demeanor dissolved instantly. As a seasoned legal professional, he recognized the catastrophic implications of a federal prosecutor crashing a private mediation. He knew immediately that his clients had not just lost their leverage, they had actively escalated their crimes into a multi-jurisdictional federal nightmare. Agent Reynolds stepped forward, his posture rigid and commanding. He did not offer a polite greeting. He did not acknowledge the defense attorney's presence. He looked directly at my father. "Richard Vance." Agent Reynolds announced, his voice echoing off the glass walls. You are currently under investigation for orchestrating a cyber espionage attempt against a military official and intercepting classified data transmissions. Did you genuinely believe that committing interstate extortion and forging medical documents in an attempt to blackmail a federal witness would improve your legal standing? The defense attorney immediately raised both hands in a placating gesture, frantically trying to regain control of the room. Now hold on, Agent Reynolds. This was simply a private mediation aimed at resolving a family dispute out of court. We were discussing a civil settlement. My clients have the right to negotiate terms to avoid a lengthy and damaging public trial. The federal prosecutor, a formidable woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression, stepped past David. She unlatched her heavy briefcase and dropped a massive stack of manila folders directly onto the center of the polished table. The loud thud made Brittany flinch violently. There is no civil mediation happening today, Counselor. The prosecutor stated, her tone icy and uncompromising. Your clients are not facing a civil dispute over a family squabble. They are facing a sweeping federal indictment. The charges include violations of the Federal Wiretapping and Espionage Act conspiracy to commit corporate cyber fraud, and now, thanks to this incredibly ill-advised meeting, witness intimidation and extortion across state lines. The defense attorney's face drained of color. He looked down at the forged psychiatric evaluation resting near his own files, suddenly realizing that the document he had used as leverage was now a prime piece of federal evidence. He took a slow, deliberate step away from the table, physically distancing himself from my family. "You cannot do this!" Patricia shrieked, her voice shrill and trembling as the reality of the situation finally breached her wall of denial. "We are upstanding citizens. We have a reputation in this city. You are ruining our lives over a stupid mistake Brittany made with some computer thing. Maddie, tell them to stop. We are your family." I looked at my mother, entirely unmoved by her frantic manufactured distress. "You stopped being my family the moment you decided my career and my sanity were acceptable collateral damage for your gambling debts," I replied coldly. "You chose your reputation over my safety. Now you have neither." The federal prosecutor opened the top folder, ignoring Patricia's hysterics entirely. She pulled out a thick document emblazoned with an official court seal. Furthermore, the prosecutor continued, addressing the entire room. "The FBI Cybercrimes Division has officially frozen the GoFundMe account Patricia Vance established under false pretenses. Soliciting donations across state lines using a fabricated narrative to fund a legal defense constitutes wire fraud. Every single dollar has been seized by the federal government, and the platform is currently issuing refunds to the defrauded donors." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. The GoFundMe campaign was their lifeline, their only means of affording the high-priced attorney standing in the room. Without that money, they were completely exposed, forced to face the overwhelming weight of the federal justice system without a financial safety net. "But that is our money!" Brittany wailed, finally finding her voice. Her face was red and blotchy, streaked with tears of pure, selfish panic. "We need that money to pay the lawyers. You cannot just take it. We have rights. You have the right to remain silent." Agent Reynolds snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "I strongly suggest you exercise it, considering every word you say is currently being documented as part of an active federal investigation." The defense attorney, realizing the absolute hopelessness of his position and the potential risk to his own legal license for participating in an extortion scheme, quickly gathered his notes. He did not look at Richard or Patricia. He did not offer any reassurance to Brittany. "I need to consult with my firm's managing partners regarding our continued representation in this matter," the attorney said tightly, his professional facade completely shattered. "Given the introduction of federal charges and the seizure of the retained funds, we must reassess our position." He was abandoning them. The moment the money evaporated and the federal hammer dropped, the loyalty they had purchased vanished into thin air. My family was left entirely alone, isolated in the massive, opulent conference room, surrounded by the undeniable, devastating consequences of their own actions. David stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with the federal prosecutor. He looked at Richard, his eyes burning with a fierce protective intensity. "You threatened my wife," David said, his voice low and dangerous. "You tried to infiltrate my home. You attempted to destroy her career to cover up your own pathetic failures. You thought you could intimidate her because you spent her entire life making her feel small. You made a catastrophic miscalculation." Richard slumped back in his leather chair, a broken, defeated man. He looked at the forged medical documents on the table, the evidence of his final desperate gambit, now serving as the nail in his own coffin. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer another pathetic excuse or a hollow apology, but the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open once again. The final participant in this orchestrated takedown had arrived. Jamal walked into the room. He was dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored suit, projecting an aura of calm, unyielding authority. He did not look angry. He did not look frantic. He looked entirely resolved, a man who had methodically excised a toxic infection from his life and was now arriving to deliver the final prognosis. Jamal, Brittany cried out, scrambling out of her chair and rushing toward the door. "Oh, thank God you are here. They are trying to take all the money. They are threatening us with federal charges. You have to help us. You have to tell them I was just confused." Jamal did not reach out to catch her. He sidestepped her frantic embrace smoothly, treating her with the same detached clinical precision he would use to avoid contamination in a sterile operating room. He walked past her, his eyes fixed firmly on the defense attorney who was attempting to hastily pack his briefcase. Counselor Jamal said, his deep voice commanding the attention of the entire room. "Before you leave, I have some documents you need to formally accept on behalf of your client." Jamal reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and produced a thick, heavy manila envelope. He tossed it onto the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy smack right next to the federal indictment files. Brittany stared at the envelope, her tear-streaked face twisting in confusion. "Jamal, baby, what is that?" "We need to focus on the federal agents right now. We need a united front." Jamal finally turned to look at her. The absolute coldness in his dark eyes made Brittany physically recoil. "There is no united front, Brittany. I am not standing with you. I am not protecting you. I am completely, permanently done with you." He gestured toward the manila envelope resting on the table. "Those are divorce papers," Jamal stated flatly, his voice echoing in the stunned silence of the conference room. "But that is just the beginning." The envelope also contains a legally binding restraining order preventing you from coming within 500 feet of my home, my surgical practice, or any of my business partners. I have legally frozen all of our joint assets and transferred my personal capital into secure accounts that you cannot access. Brittany let out a strangled, breathless gasp. She gripped the edge of the conference table to steady herself, her entire world collapsing around her in real time. "You cannot do this," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "We are married. I made a mistake, but you promised to support me. You stole $400,000 from my business to pay off illegal loan sharks." Jamal roared, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking to reveal the raw, burning fury beneath. "You forged my signature on federal wire transfers. You jeopardized my medical license and the livelihoods of my staff to cover your pathological gambling addiction. Do not you dare talk to me about marriage vows." He turned to the federal prosecutor and Agent Reynolds, giving them a curt, respectful nod. "I have already submitted a comprehensive report to the Internal Revenue Service regarding the financial fraud and identity theft she committed using my credentials. The FBI has full access to the cloned hard drives from my home network. I will cooperate entirely with any federal prosecution necessary to ensure she faces the maximum penalty under the law." The absolute total destruction of Brittany's life was complete. She had lost her husband, her wealth, her social status, and her freedom in a matter of minutes. The golden child who had spent her entire life manipulating everyone around her and escaping consequences had finally hit a wall she could not charm her way through. Brittany collapsed onto the floor of the conference room. She did not cry elegantly. She wailed, a guttural, agonizing sound of pure despair curling into a tight ball on the expensive carpeting. Patricia shrieked, rushing to her daughter's side, but the sheer shock of the cascading disasters overwhelmed her. My mother swayed on her feet, her eyes rolling back in her head, and she fainted dead away, collapsing onto the floor beside Brittany. Richard did not move to help his wife or his daughter. He sat frozen in his chair, staring blankly at the federal indictment files and the divorce papers resting on the mahogany table. Agent Reynolds stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. He approached Richard, his expression devoid of any sympathy. Richard Vance Reynolds announced, grabbing my father's arm and hauling him roughly to his feet, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud, extortion, and violations of the Espionage Act." The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking around my father's wrists echoed loudly in the room, cutting through Brittany's hysterical sobbing. It was the sound of absolute, undeniable justice. The federal prosecutor did not flinch at the sound of the handcuffs. She remained standing at the head of the mahogany table, her presence completely commanding the room, as Agent Reynolds hauled my father to his feet. Richard stumbled, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping on the polished floor. The blustering corporate titan who had spent my entire life dictating the terms of my existence was now physically trembling, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. "You seem to fundamentally misunderstand the gravity of the federal justice system." Richard, the prosecutor, began, her voice ringing with clinical, terrifying precision. "You are not sitting in a civil mediation room negotiating a slap on the wrist. You are facing the full, unyielding weight of the United States Department of Justice." Richard opened his mouth, perhaps to offer another pathetic bribe or beg for a plea deal, but the prosecutor raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "Let me clarify exactly what is going to happen to you and your daughter," she continued, tapping the thick stack of indictment files. "When you conspired to plant an active transmitting surveillance device on a Navy SEAL commander, you crossed a threshold from a standard privacy violation into the realm of national security. You are being charged under the Federal Wiretapping and Electronic Surveillance Control Act. Because the target was a high-ranking military official with access to classified Department of Defense intelligence, those charges are enhanced under the Espionage Act." Brittany, still curled on the floor near Jamal's discarded divorce papers, let out a choked, desperate gasp. I did not know, she wailed, her voice muffled by the carpet. "I swear I did not know it was an espionage device. Dad told me it was just a tracker. I just wanted Maddie's bank passwords. I did not want to steal military secrets." Agent Reynolds looked down at her with absolute disgust. "Ignorance of the hardware's full capability does not negate your intent to deploy a surveillance weapon against a federal officer," he stated coldly. "You placed the device. You activated it. You are equally culpable." The prosecutor turned her attention back to Richard. "The penalties for these violations in a federal court are severe. We are looking at a maximum sentence of up to 15 years in federal prison. And unlike state facilities, the federal prison system does not offer early parole for good behavior. You will serve every single day of the sentence handed down by the judge." Richard's knees buckled. If Agent Reynolds had not been holding him up by the bicep, my father would have collapsed entirely. He was a man who panicked when the air conditioning in his luxury SUV malfunctioned. The reality of spending the next decade and a half in a federal penitentiary was physically destroying him. "But your absolute worst miscalculation," the prosecutor added, her tone sharpening into a lethal edge, "was the GoFundMe campaign." Patricia groaned, her eyelids fluttering, as she slowly began to regain consciousness on the floor. She blinked uncomprehendingly at the ceiling, trying to orient herself after fainting from the sheer shock of Jamal's departure and the federal raid. "You believed you could manipulate the public to fund your defense," the prosecutor said, looking down at my mother as she weakly propped herself up on her elbows. "But by using an electronic communications network to broadcast a fabricated, malicious narrative across state lines, for the purpose of soliciting funds, you committed wire fraud under Title 18 of the United States Code. Every single donation you received constitutes a separate count of fraud. You weaponized the internet against a federal witness and a military officer, and you left a digital paper trail a mile long." Patricia gasped, grasping the leg of the conference table and pulling herself up into a sitting position. Her meticulously styled hair was a bird's nest of loose strands, and her expensive makeup was smeared across her cheeks. She looked at Richard, who was standing in handcuffs, and then at the federal prosecutor. "The money," Patricia stammered, her voice raspy and weak. "You cannot take the money. We need it for the lawyers. We need it to save our home." "The FBI Cyber Crimes Division has already frozen the account," the prosecutor reiterated, refusing to offer a single shred of sympathy. "The funds are currently being reversed and returned to the defrauded donors." Furthermore, because Jamal Vance has officially reported Brittany to the Internal Revenue Service for identity theft and embezzlement, any remaining personal assets you hold will likely be seized to pay restitution to his surgical practice. You have absolutely nothing left. The room descended into a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by Brittany's pathetic, rhythmic sobbing. The house of cards had not just collapsed, it had been incinerated. The wealth, the status, the arrogance, and the entitlement were entirely gone, replaced by the cold, unforgiving reality of federal law. I stood beside David, watching the people who had tormented me for 33 years finally face the consequences of their own toxic malice. There was no lingering guilt in my chest. There was no hesitation. The phantom chains of familial obligation had been severed completely. "Maddie," Patricia whispered, turning her tear-streaked face toward me. Her voice was a desperate pleading croak. "Please, you are my daughter. You cannot just stand there and let them take your family away. Tell them we are sorry. Tell them we will give back the money. Please save us." I looked at my mother, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over me. "You spent my entire life telling me I was a failure," I said, my voice steady, clear, and ringing with absolute truth. "You told me I was useless, an embarrassment, a disappointment, who could never measure up to the golden child. You built your entire identity on making me feel small so you could feel powerful." I stepped closer to the table, my eyes locking onto hers. "But look at you now. You are sitting on the floor of a law office, begging the daughter you abused to save you from federal prison because you were too arrogant to realize you were not invincible. I am not going to save you. I am going to watch you answer for every single crime you committed." David placed a warm, heavy hand on my lower back, a silent, grounding show of absolute support. "We are done here," he said, his voice carrying the finality of a closing door. Agent Reynolds began reading Richard his Miranda rights, his voice a steady rhythmic drone that echoed off the glass walls. 2 more NCIS agents entered the room to haul Brittany to her feet, securing her wrists in heavy steel cuffs. She did not fight them this time. She was completely broken, her spirit crushed by the sheer weight of the evidence and the departure of her husband. David and I turned our backs on the wreckage of my family. We walked out of the conference room together, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind us, cutting off the sound of my mother's frantic, desperate wailing. We stepped into the elevator, the polished metal doors sliding closed. The descent to the lobby was smooth and quiet. I leaned my head against David's shoulder, exhaling a long, deep breath I felt like I had been holding since the day of our wedding. The air outside the high-rise was warm and clear, the bustling city moving around us, completely unaware of the absolute justice that had just been served on the top floor. The air outside the high-rise was warm and clear, the bustling city moving around us, completely unaware of the absolute justice that had just been served on the top floor. But the final execution of my family's downfall was not quite finished. As David and I stood on the sunlit sidewalk, taking our first true breaths of freedom, the devastating crescendo of Jamal's revenge was unfolding in the conference room we had just left behind. Upstairs, the high-priced defense attorney was in a state of absolute frantic panic. He was practically throwing his expensive fountain pens and legal pads into his leather briefcase, desperate to flee the room before the federal agents could implicate him in the extortion plot. He zipped his bag and turned toward the glass doors, only to find Jamal blocking his path. Jamal did not look at Brittany, who was still weeping hysterically on the floor. He did not look at Patricia, who was weakly leaning against the wall, or Richard, who was paralyzed in the grip of Agent Reynolds. Jamal kept his dark, unwavering eyes locked entirely on the fleeing attorney. "You are not leaving yet?" Counselor Jamal stated, his voice a low, commanding rumble that demanded absolute compliance. You formally represent her. That means you are going to formally accept service on her behalf. Jamal reached into his tailored suit jacket and withdrew a thick, sealed manila envelope. He did not hand it to Brittany. He stepped forward and slapped it down onto the mahogany table, sliding it forcefully across the polished wood until it hit the attorney's briefcase. Open it, Jamal commanded. Read it into the record for the federal agents present. The attorney swallowed hard, his hands visibly shaking as he broke the seal. He pulled out a stack of crisp, legally binding documents. The first was exactly what Brittany had feared most, a fast-tracked absolute petition for divorce, citing egregious financial fraud and irreconcilable differences. But the divorce petition was merely the appetizer. The second document is an active permanent restraining order signed by a superior court judge this morning. Jamal explained, his tone clinical and detached. It bars your client from coming within 500 feet of my residence, my surgical practice, my vehicle, and my person. If she attempts to call me, email me, or use a third party to contact me, she will be arrested for violating a court order. She is officially a ghost to me. Brittany let out a loud, agonizing wail from the carpet. Jamal, no, you cannot leave me with nothing. I have no money. I have nowhere to go. Jamal ignored her completely, keeping his focus on the pale, sweating attorney. Read the third document, counselor, the one with the federal seal. The attorney pulled the final packet of papers from the envelope. His eyes scanned the header and his jaw dropped. He looked at Brittany with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. This is a confirmation of filing from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The attorney breathed out, his voice cracking. Exactly, Jamal confirmed, delivering the ultimate inescapable death blow to his wife's future. When Brittany decided to play the cryptocurrency market with stolen funds, she hit a verification wall. She needed a clean, high-tier credit profile to secure the massive margin loans from those shadow lenders. So she stole my social security number. She forged my signature on federal tax documents and financial disclosures to bypass the security checks. The federal prosecutor, who was standing nearby, raised an impressed eyebrow. Identity theft to defraud a federal financial institution. That is a mandatory minimum sentence. I handed over every single IP log and forged signature to the IRS this morning. Jamal continued, his voice ringing with the finality of a closing coffin. She did not just steal from my business. She committed aggravated identity theft and tax evasion. The IRS is currently seizing her personal bank accounts, her vehicle, and her jewelry to cover the fraudulent tax liabilities she triggered. She is absolutely, completely destitute. The reality of the IRS involvement hit the room like a bomb. Federal wiretapping charges were terrifying, but the IRS Criminal Investigation Division was a relentless, unstoppable machine that would strip Brittany of every single asset she had ever touched. Brittany realized there was no charm, no manipulation, and no amount of crying that could save her from the federal tax authorities. She collapsed fully flat onto the floor. Her vocal cords tore as she let out a raw, deafening scream of pure panic, her manicured hands beating uselessly against the expensive carpeting. Patricia, who had been propped up against the wall, watched her golden child completely shatter. The sheer volume of criminal charges, the insurmountable debt, and the absolute destruction of their high society facade overloaded her delicate image-obsessed brain. Patricia let out a short, breathless gasp, her eyes rolling into the back of her head, and fainted for the second time, collapsing into a heap on the floor beside her screaming daughter. Richard did not move to help his wife. He could not. Agent Reynolds grabbed Richard by the collar of his ruined dress shirt, hauling him violently out of his chair. "Put your hands behind your back," Reynolds ordered, kicking Richard's legs apart to unbalance him. Richard offered no resistance. The blustering, arrogant father who had threatened to ruin my life less than 2 hours ago was completely docile. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked securely around Richard's wrists, right there in the conference room. He was marched toward the glass doors, a disgraced handcuffed criminal being paraded past the horrified receptionists and legal aides in the hallway. The defense attorney dropped the manila envelope onto the table as if it were radioactive. He looked at the federal agents, then at Jamal. Let the record show that as of this exact moment, I am withdrawing as legal counsel for Richard, Patricia, and Brittany, the attorney declared, his voice high and frantic. I will not represent clients facing active IRS and federal espionage indictments. They are on their own. The attorney bolted from the conference room, leaving my family entirely defenseless, bankrupt, and in federal custody. Jamal stood in the wreckage of the family he had married into. He adjusted his suit jacket, his expression completely tranquil. He walked out of the conference room, leaving the screaming, fainting, and handcuffing behind him. He rode the elevator down to the lobby, the smooth descent washing away the final remnants of his toxic marriage. David and I were still standing on the warm sidewalk when the glass doors of the high-rise pushed open. Jamal stepped out into the sunlight. He looked exhausted, but there was a distinct, undeniable lightness to his posture. The heavy burden of my family's manipulation had been lifted from his shoulders. He walked over to us. He did not offer a grand emotional speech. He simply reached out and shook David's hand with a firm, respectful grip. Then he turned to me. "It is over," Jamal said quietly. "The IRS paperwork just broke them. The lawyer dropped them as clients. Richard is in handcuffs, and Brittany has absolutely nothing left." I looked at my former brother-in-law, a man who had shown incredible integrity in the face of massive betrayal. "Thank you, Jamal," I said, meaning every single syllable. "You did not have to protect us, but you did." "I was protecting myself," Maddie, Jamal corrected with a small, genuine smile. "But I am glad you are finally free of them too. You deserve a good life." Jamal gave us one final nod, turned and walked down the bustling city street toward his car. He merged into the crowd, a free man walking away from a burning bridge, leaving the ashes of my toxic family far behind him. I watched Jamal disappear into the bustling sea of city pedestrians, his confident stride carrying him far away from the toxic wreckage of our shared past. David wrapped a solid, comforting arm around my shoulders, guiding me toward his parked truck. The oppressive, heavy dread that had choked my lungs for 33 years was completely gone, evaporating into the crisp afternoon air. We drove home in a comfortable, victorious silence. The federal justice system moves with a slow, grinding inevitability that absolutely pulverized what was left of my family. The ensuing months played out like a high-speed news montage broadcast across local television networks and documented in scathing federal court transcripts. Richard Vance stood before a United States district judge, completely stripped of his custom-tailored suits and arrogant corporate posturing. He wore standard-issue prison clothing, his shoulders slumped, and his hands shackled at his waist. The judge did not hold back a single ounce of condemnation. She explicitly cited his weaponization of forged psychiatric records and his attempt to extort a federal witness as particularly heinous acts of malicious intimidation. My father was handed a 12-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Brittany faced her own brutal reckoning. The golden child, completely devoid of her heavy makeup, designer gowns, and manipulated social media filters, wept openly in the courtroom. The judge handed her an 8-year sentence for her role in the cyber espionage plot and the unauthorized surveillance of a military officer. But the Internal Revenue Service delivered the truly fatal, irreversible blow. Federal tax agents auctioned off her luxury SUV, her designer handbags, and every last piece of jewelry she owned to cover the massive fraud penalties and pay restitution to Jamal's surgical practice. The woman who had built her entire identity on projecting wealth was reduced to a federal inmate number with absolutely zero assets to her name. Patricia was the only one who avoided a prison cell, but she was trapped in a hell entirely of her own making. As a named co-conspirator in the fraudulent GoFundMe campaign, she was held legally responsible for the financial fallout. To satisfy the federal seizure orders and reimburse the thousands of defrauded donors, the government forced the immediate liquidation of her sprawling, pristine suburban mansion. I heard from a former neighbor that my mother was forced to pack her remaining clothes into cheap black trash bags on the day of the foreclosure. Her elite country club friends, terrified of being associated with a high-profile federal extortion case, completely shunned her. They blocked her phone number and instructed their gated community security guards to turn her away on sight. Patricia currently resides in a cramped, poorly ventilated one-bedroom apartment overlooking a noisy, congested intersection. She is entirely isolated from the high society she worshipped above her own flesh and blood, living out her days in complete social exile. Jamal, on the other hand, flourished. Unburdened by the staggering financial drain and emotional manipulation of his fraudulent marriage, he expanded his orthopedic surgical clinic and opened a second location. He sent us a brief warm holiday card last December, a quiet confirmation that he had successfully and happily restarted his life. As for my own career, the corporate suspension was lifted the very next morning following the federal raid. The chief executive officer of my financial firm called me personally offering a profound, unreserved apology. He practically begged me to return, offering a substantial raise and a promotion to an executive data security role. The board of directors realized that my uncompromising integrity and quick thinking had saved their institution from a catastrophic multi-million-dollar data breach. Now, exactly 1 year after that disastrous wedding reception, the heavy, suffocating anxiety that dictated my entire life is completely eradicated. I step out onto the back patio of our secure, beautifully quiet home. The evening air is warm, filled with the rich scent of blooming jasmine from the garden. The perimeter security system hums faintly in the background, a comforting, invisible shield of safety rather than a strict preparation for war. David is standing by the wooden railing, watching the sun dip below the distant tree line, painting the sky in brilliant shades of amber and violet. He looks relaxed, the rigid tactical tension of the past year completely melted away from his broad shoulders. I walk up behind him, wrapping my arms around his waist and resting my cheek against his strong back. He turns smoothly, wrapping me in a warm embrace and handing me a glass of rich red wine. His blue eyes soften as he looks down at me, reflecting a deep, unwavering devotion. There are no more frantic burner phone calls. There are no more manipulative guilt trips, no more forged documents, and no more forced apologies. The silence in our home is not the tense, waiting silence of a battlefield. It is the deep, resonant peace of true, absolute freedom. I am no longer the family scapegoat. I am a successful, respected woman who fought a war for her own independence and won a decisive, crushing victory. I take a slow sip of my wine, savoring the tranquility of the moment. I look up at my husband, the man who recognized my worth, and stood like an impenetrable wall of steel between me and the people who tried to destroy me. A genuine bright smile spreads across my face. I lean my head against his chest, letting out a soft, joyful laugh. Next time someone gives me a gift, I will let you scan it first. Maddie's journey teaches a profound lesson: shared DNA does not excuse toxic behavior. For years, she endured relentless manipulations simply because they were family. However, true family is defined by mutual respect and protection, not exploitation. Her ultimate freedom didn't come from her financial success, but from her absolute courage to establish ironclad boundaries and enforce consequences for those who tried to destroy her. Walking away from abusive people is never a failure. It is a vital act of self-preservation and self-love. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with a toxic relative to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below